Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and call to order the regular meeting of the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals for September 25th, 2013. First item on the agenda is the consideration of minutes for two regular meetings, the first one on July 31st, 2013, and August 28th meeting. Those minutes were included with our agenda materials. Are there any changes to those minutes? If not, those minutes will stand approved as presented, and we will move on to consider new business, taking up variance requests first. First application there is Z13050 by Mr. Jim Lukens of Lukens Engineering Consultants for TT of G Murfreesboro Property, LLC. And he is requesting a 10-foot variance from the Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which states that the minimum space between buildings and parking shall be 10 feet on lots of 1.5 acres or more. And this is for property located in the Commercial Highway and Gateway Design Overlay District along the south side of Forretress Boulevard and the north side of John R. Rice Boulevard. All right, Mr. Blum, if you'd review that application for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and members of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Our first request today, as you mentioned, is a variance request for property located along the south side of Forretress Boulevard, just west of the interchange with Medical Center Parkway and Forretress Boulevard. You'll see that it is the area on the aerial photo that is denoted by the word site. It is bordered on its south side by John R. Rice Boulevard. This property has recently been approved by both by the Planning Commission for both initial design review and final design review for a new automotive dealership. The property, or the Planning Commission's final design review approval, was made subject to the applicant applying for and being granted a variance to the requirement in the Gateway Design Overlay District that on sites of more than 1.5 acres, that the minimum distance between buildings and parking shall be 10 feet. Much like a similar request made for the Toyota Murfreesboro dealership on the opposite side of Forretress Boulevard several months ago, the applicant has come before the board today seeking a variance with regards to the areas that are where the dealership needs direct access into the building. And because there are several aspects of the dealership, such as the car wash, the showroom, the bays for the vehicle service areas, need direct access into the building, at those areas the separation, the 10-foot separation is not possible. There is also an area at the northeast corner of the building which is only about 3.5 feet from the property line. And I'll go ahead and pull up the site plan. You'll notice that the areas denoted in the red hatched area are the areas where there is direct access into the building. And then the area denoted by the blue area where it says driveway within 10 feet of the building is the northeast corner of the building, in which there's kind of a pinch point at that location. You'll see that the shape of the property with respect to the right-of-way of I-24 at that interchange, it does a sharp 90-degree turn and creates a little bit of a pinch point at that location. So all of the areas that they are requesting variances for are for areas of direct access into the building, with the exception of that northeast corner of the building. The applicant has indicated in his letter that the reasons for making application are for the practical reasons of establishing this use on the property, which is a use allowed by right in both the CH and GDO1 zones. These are typical accessory uses, the automotive repair, the car wash, the showroom. They're typical accessory uses to an automotive dealership, and the direct access into the building is necessary for those uses. Also, with regards to the northeast corner of the building, he mentions that the shape of the property, especially with regards to the to the shape of the property adjacent to the right-of-way of I-24, as well as the location of drainage infrastructure on the property. It really limits where the building can be placed on the property. And so those are the reasons that he has given for his request for this variance. As I mentioned, the Planning Commission has given this application or has given the development final design review approval and has indicated that the applicant needed to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for this variance request. Also included in your agenda materials is a copy of the landscape plan so that you can see the landscape treatment that the applicant is proposing to provide around the building itself. And with that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing, and Mr. Lukens is present as well if you have any questions for him.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Mr. Lukens, anything you'd like to add to your application, sir? Okay. Then at this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
Chairman Rogers, if there's no discussion, this is very similar to the applicant that we had on the kind of the opposite side of Veterans Parkway, and I would make a motion that we approve subject to staff comments.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, I can't resist making further comment on this. As you know, when the Toyota dealership, not talking to you specifically, Matthew, I'm just looking at you. When it came to us, I was surprised, I guess, surprised to learn that a car dealership was an allowed use in the Gateway Design Overlay District, which it is. True?
That is correct.
I mean, they can come in as a matter of right into the Gateway Design Overlay District. The only reason they're here today is because of this requirement that there's no landscaping buffer of at least 10 feet between parking and the building itself. I'll say this: historically, when this property was purchased by the city in back 10, 12 years ago, however long ago it was, my understanding was it was purchased with the intent that this gateway area be an area that's unique to Murfreesboro, unique in design, which it has been. I mean, I don't think that there's another area of Murfreesboro that is aesthetically as nice as the Gateway is. But I thought it was also supposed to be unique in use. And I've since found out that when the ordinance was approved, that the uses aren't unique. In fact, there's very little that's actually excluded from the Gateway. If you look at all the list of uses that are allowed in the Gateway, there's only, I think there's industrial that's excluded, and something that's akin to industrial. But the door is essentially wide open to anything that really wants to be built in the Gateway, but say for a few things, now including apartments and vinyl that have vinyl siding. And so because I really struggle with the fact that there were guidelines put in place to make this a special area of Murfreesboro, that we adhere to those guidelines. And the guidelines include 10-foot buffer between the parking and the building. And so, I mean, for that reason, I've got to draw the line somewhere. I reluctantly voted for the Toyota Murfreesboro one, think in my comments to the Toyota Murfreesboro application, I said I really struggle with this one because I'm worried that car dealerships flock together. When you see car dealerships, you don't see just one, you see multiple car dealerships. And sure enough, that was just 2-3 months ago. And sure enough, here comes another one on the heels of that one. And so I personally am going to draw the line here and say I cannot continue to support the degradation of the standards for the gateway with these applications. So for that reason, I'm going to vote against this one. I just wanted to express why I'm going to vote against this one.
Chairman Rogers, just in response to that, one thing that I did want to, or a couple things that I wanted to mention. This particular property, I don't believe that the city has ever owned this particular piece of property. Is that?
It never has. That's correct.
I believe that the city-owned property was all on the east side of the interstate. There is a list of uses that are prohibited. Some residential, some institutional, some commercial, and some industrial. One thing that I wanted to take the opportunity to do is we are actually going through a kind of a comprehensive review of our Gateway Design Overlay District regulations, and on our agenda for the next Planning Commission meeting, we are actually looking at fine-tuning some of those regulations now that we've had 10 years of practice with those regulations. And one of the things that we're looking to do is to add to this list of prohibited uses, and there are a number of uses that have been discussed about prohibiting in the Gateway Design Overlay District. But at our next night Planning Commission meeting in early October, we will be having a public hearing on the revisions for our Gateway Design Overlay District ordinance.
And a good point. I did submit comments to Mr. Adelot about my thoughts on that. In fact, I didn't understand that they're considering further restricting uses in the gateway. I understood that they're actually considering expanding uses to include more in the gateway. And although the city has never owned this, it still nevertheless was a part of the overall idea of the gateway. Hence, that's why it's in the Gateway Design Overlay District. So obviously, even though the city may not have owned it at one time, that was the theory anyway, that this was part of an overall project that they and we as citizens were all buying into, that this was going to be a unique area of Murfreesboro. But
Chairman Rogers, if I may, the city-owned property was all, in fact, east of Thompson Lane. And there are more restrictions on the property that the city had. There are more restrictions on the property that the city had owned than there is on the rest of the property. And I believe that the gateway stopped at I-24 originally. Didn't when these people started to redevelop the west of I-24 and the Manson Forretress Interchange was rebuilt. I believe that the landowners out there voluntarily adopted the design standards for the gateway for this side of the road also. And auto dealerships are not allowed in the property that the city owned, I believe. I'm fairly sure that's accurate, which is GDO 3, if I remember right. But have always, it's never been prohibited. And the idea of this as a mixed-use area where people would perhaps live over retail stores or offices has always been, I think, part of the concept. So the multifamily is not a unique or a new concept for this whole area. I don't believe single-family residences are anticipated, but a concentration, perhaps almost a future downtown, if you will, where there is mixed use of commercial and retail and residence and entertainment, all in one area, and perhaps even all walking distance, or much of it walking distance for people, has been part of the concept, I believe, from day one.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. You're talking about those concepts where you have businesses under residential and those community type developments. That would make it unique. But when you just have a series of car dealerships that line a particular road, that you can find that on Memorial, you can find that on Broad Street, you can find that on Church Street, you can find that on any street in Murfreesboro. So that's why I was just disappointed that it's, I guess, evolving. And I may have misunderstood the original intent on it, but I really was optimistic, I guess, and hopeful that this area, the area being the Gateway Design Overlay District, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 10, I don't know, was going to be held to a higher standard, I guess.
And certainly it is in terms of landscaping, generally setbacks. I think we've recognized that there are some uses that to have a practical use of that, you have to allow drive-in access, and a setback just doesn't work with the drive-in. So, and for that we've had that in a number of situations where the setbacks have been the parking setback and landscape next to the buildings have been granted variances so that drive-through pickup windows can be put in, banks can have a drive-through teller lane, and for a car dealership, you simply have to be able to get cars in and out of the building at multiple locations. So I think this is an appropriate application for a use that in fact is a use as of right in this area, and I would recommend that it be approved because it is a use they have of right, and in order to do that, the practical matter, they have to have this variance.
I tend to agree with Chairman Rogers, and the surprise that our colleague at the Planning Commission and his other Planning Commission members thought this was a good thing to have. I understand that it's a right. I understand understand that a business would want, a car dealership would want to be at that area. But I also think that the Gateway Overlay District is a special place. It has been a very well-designed place so far, and I'd like for it to continue to grow in that fashion. I also don't typically think of car dealerships as being in that fashion. However, as I understand the Gateway Overlay District, and as Mr. Ives has very clearly stated, I think that this is appropriate use under the code as it is, and I think that that's just like the drive-through windows that we've also already approved, just like the other dealership that we've already approved. This is a sort of use that is necessary for this dealership to be operable. And despite my reluctance and despite my feelings about having car dealerships in that area, I think it's appropriate, and I plan to agree with the motion that's on the table.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay. Mr. Lukens, that application has been approved. Thank you. All right. We'll next consider some special use permit and variance requests. There we have our first one is application Z13051 by Mr. William Terry for the City of Murfreesboro. And he is making the following request for property located in a residential single-family RS10 zone at 1311 Jones Boulevard. First component of that application is a special use permit in order to construct a telephone or telegraph facility, which would be a telecommunications tower. Secondly, regarding construction of this new tower, a 115-foot variance from the 35-foot maximum permitted building height. And then finally, a variance from the ordinance that states that for corner lots in residential districts, detached accessory structures and uses shall be located no closer to the front lot line than 10 feet behind the front of the principal structure on that lot. All right, Mr. Blum, if you review that one for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. This is the fourth of four similar requests, and I'm going to go over the request itself and the location, but I'm going to lean heavily on the folks from the police department that are here today to kind of explain the functionality of the proposed towers and the benefit of the towers for the police and fire departments. I think they could probably explain their need for these towers a lot better than I could. With that being said, the first of the four requests, as you mentioned, is located at 1311 Jones Boulevard. That is the location of Fire Station number 4, which is at the southwest corner of Jones Boulevard and West Clark Boulevard. You'll see on the aerial photo before you, there is an existing tower right here behind the existing fire, right behind the fire station. The property itself not only has the fire station on it, but it has Mitchell-Nielsen Primary on it as well. And as you can see, to the west, there are single-family residences on White Boulevard, and to the north, there are single-family residences on Clark Boulevard, and across Jones Boulevard to the east, there is Mitchell-Nielsen Elementary. There's an existing tower behind Fire Station number 4. That tower was approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals for a 55-foot variance back in 2003 for a 90-foot tall tower. Now, that tower is not quite 90 feet right now. From what I understand from the police department, about the top 10 or 15 feet of that tower broke off during one of our storm events back about 2 or 3 years ago. So they are planning to remove that tower altogether and construct a new tower about 10 feet to the west of the current location, or the location of the current tower. Right now, the police department the police and fire departments have limited communications infrastructure. There is the tower on South Church Street, but what they are proposing to do is to build a new set of towers around the perimeter of the city that will facilitate the current technology needs that they have for communications, as well as plan for needs on the horizon in the city's urban growth boundary. These towers that they are proposing will provide coverage throughout the city's urban growth boundary. So this one, as you can see, is in the heart of Murfreesboro, and the three that we have coming up on the agenda are on the perimeter of Murfreesboro. Now, it's a little bit difficult to see on this particular plan, but on the full-size site plans that you have in front of you, you'll see the site plan for the proposed tower location. I think I'll just go back to the aerial photo. There will be a 75 by 50 fenced-in area to the rear of Fire Station number 4, and the applicant is proposing a 150-foot tall tower to replace that 90-foot tower. The fenced-in area would be an 8-foot tall chain-link fence with 3 strands of barbed wire on top, and there would be an evergreen screen planted around that 75 by 50-foot compound. The tower itself will not meet the setback requirement for an accessory structure in the RS10 zoning district, and that is the reason for the second variance that's listed on your agenda. Detached accessory structures, including the tower and the equipment shelter that is proposed, are required to be at least 10 feet further away from the front property line, and in this case, that front property line being Clark Boulevard, than the principal structure. And the principal structure is Fire Station number 4. The shelter, it actually is slightly closer to West Clark Boulevard than the fire hall itself. So the police department has requested a variance to the requirement that accessory structures must be at least 10 feet further away from the front property line than the principal structure. Now, despite the fact that a variance for this requirement is needed, the accessory structures will all be at least 90 feet from the front property line along Clark and will be well out of the 35-foot required front yard. And considering the distance of the existing fire station from Clark, approximately 115 feet, the options for the placement of the tower and its associated accessory structures on site without requesting this variance are actually quite limited. The height variance is for 115 feet. The maximum height in the RS-10 zoning district is 35 feet, so 35 plus 150 will give them a height of 150 feet for this proposed tower. As I mentioned, for reference, the existing tower was approved to be 90 feet tall. And also for the board's reference, in 2003, the BZA approved a 129-foot height variance for the water tank south of the subject property on Jones Boulevard to be a total of 164 feet in height. So this tower would be roughly 14 feet less in height than that water tank. The police department has provided information from the FAA, a letter of no hazard from the FAA, as well as a memo from Mr. Chad Gerke, the Murfreesboro Airport manager, stating that the tower will not have a negative impact on the Murfreesboro Airport. The site plan depicts the fall zone radius for the tower at 150 feet, which is the height of the tower itself. A structural engineer has not been enlisted to actually provide an official fall zone radius for the tower. The civil engineer who designed the site plan put the fall zone radius as the height of the tower, but the tower itself, or the fall zone radius, can actually be less than the height of the tower, as it could be designed to collapse upon itself. With that being stated, each component of this application will require its own motion. If the board approves the special use permit request, staff recommends the following conditions. The proposed driveway for the tower shall only be used for tower access, and all other applicable state and federal approvals for the proposed tower must be obtained. And I'd like to show you some photographs of the site. First of all, I'll show you some photographs that the police department submitted of a similar tower that is representative of what they are looking to build. Even though this says 285-foot tower, that's not what they are proposing to build at this location. The tower at fire station number 4 would be 150 feet tall. As I mentioned, this would be representative of the type of tower that would be constructed, as well as the antenna that would be mounted on the tower. And the base of the tower. And the building that would be the equipment shelter at the base. Here's some photographs of the subject property itself. This is the front of the fire station from Jones. This is looking at the fire station from Clark. You'll see that existing tower just to the rear of the fire station building. That would be removed, as I mentioned. This is looking west from the subject property towards the homes in the distance that are on White Boulevard. Looking northwest towards Clark Boulevard. And the homes directly across Clark from the subject property. And looking east across Jones. And looking south down Jones, and you can see on the very left-hand side of the photograph is the existing water tank at 164 feet. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And I believe Chief Glenn Chrisman is here and has some information that he would like to provide the board on the actual use of the towers as it applies to the police department and the fire department.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Good afternoon, Chief.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for allowing us to appear this afternoon. As Mr. Blomley has very capably presented in the first item, this is the first step of some major improvements to our two-way radio infrastructure for police and fire in the city of Murfreesboro. If I can ask you to step back for a few years, you may recall that during the tragedies at the World Trade Center in 2001, one of the things that was a glaring issue there was the ability of first responders, particularly police and firefighters, to enjoy or reap the benefits of interoperable communications. Basically, we need to be able to talk to each other. As you have seen, public safety telecommunications systems evolve since that time, many of which have been funded with federal grant dollars, Homeland Security dollars, and other things. There's been a specific emphasis and a focus on designing those systems where interoperability was a design element, so that should we find ourselves, heaven forbid, in a situation where we have a major crisis, that our first responders have the ability to communicate seamlessly with one another as they provide for an emergency response. The infrastructure that currently provides two-way radio communications for Murfreesboro Police and Fire is 1970s technology. The fire department uses a VHF, very high frequency communication system. Police uses a UHF, ultra high frequency communication system. If we look at modern technology, what you see in the larger systems that are now being built out, they operate much in the same fashion as cellular telephone technology, 700, 800 megahertz. So with that in view, what we did some months ago was approach the council and city management staff and ask them to entertain a prospective design for the replacement of all of the two-way fire and police communications technology towards 700, 800 evolution technology. That's what the state of Tennessee is doing. That's what Metro Nashville has already done. That's what some of the municipalities around the Middle Tennessee area have done, including Middle Tennessee State University. It's an expensive project. There's a lot of infrastructure that has to be rebuilt, and this begins with the location of tower sites. Lieutenant Watson, can you bring me that radio, please, sir? The world that our police and firefighters live in today is dependent upon mobile communication, and particularly mobile communication that is on the belt of the police officer or firefighter. It's a walkie-talkie and typically a remote microphone. I share that with you because the importance of that is we have to have the infrastructure in place that allows a police officer or firefighter to communicate audibly, clearly, without regard to whatever emergency they may be in. They've got to be able to speak across that device and be heard. Their very life may depend on it, and the lives of the people that they're trying to serve may depend on it. You can have the best cars, you can have the best uniforms, you can have the best building, you can have the best training, you can have the best pay and benefits. But if one of our emergency first responders needs this communication capacity and doesn't have it, it's a life or death emergency. So this is critical, mission critical infrastructure for public safety. That begins with the ability to communicate effectively. That begins with infrastructure, and that begins with tower sites, and that's where we are today. We asked Motorola, who is the vendor for the early part of our project, to look at areas within the 20-year urban growth boundary for the city of Murfreesboro and identify those sites that optimally would serve as tower sites for the design, development, and construction of a new communications system for police and fire, not only now, but for the next 20 years. They brought back 4 sites that overlaid, if you will, with properties that the city already owns, and they're the focus of the items that Mr. Blomley will be talking to you more about as we move forward this afternoon. The towers are designed so that they have redundant transmit and receive capability, and that is of critical importance because, as Mr. Blomley mentioned very briefly, and I'll touch on only slightly, we have a single tower location now that holds all of the infrastructure components for emergency communication in the city. if we have a catastrophic event at that location, whether it be by natural or man-made factors, then it could render our communication system sorely lacking. The system that's proposed begins with a central tower site at the Mitchell-Nielsen location, which Mr. Blom has already described. That site will give us inter-city transmit-receive capability, but will also give us the ability to have transmission strength to penetrate buildings. I was in a building at MTSU yesterday in preparation for an official visit into the city from some outside visitors. If I'm in a concrete and steel and glass facility on a security detail or in the midst of some kind of an issue and I need to communicate out, this device needs to be able to have sufficient transmission capability to be able to do that. The tower at Jones will give us inner-city, centrally located penetration power to penetrate buildings and facilities and structures. The 3 towers that are located or projected to be located on the external areas of the city will give us coverage all across the city of Murfreesboro. And if you look at them, I think Mr. Blomley gave you a map very similar to this one. In that map, you will notice that the 20-year urban growth boundary for the city is illustrated in the pink shaded areas. And those tower site locations are illustrated by the 4 red dots and 1 proposed green dot that we may come back later with a requested site. But you'll notice that those towers are at the extremes of the 20-year urban growth boundary. So we think those will give us great coverage as our city grows in the future and also provide for outstanding coverage for our first responders, our police officers, and our firefighters. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, what we are asking in a number of items this afternoon is for you to support our efforts to improve public safety communications in the city of Murfreesboro for police and fire. Chief Gaines is not here this afternoon, but we have worked hand in glove with fire as we've designed the system. Bill Terry is our information systems manager for police and fire. He's here this afternoon, along with Lieutenant Sanders Watson, who is our purchasing agent, handles a lot of the purchasing for our police department. We'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have. Mr. Huddleston is also here this afternoon, who has worked with us to begin the design for the sites, and I'm sure he's available should you have any other questions. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
All right. Thank you, Chief Chrisman. Any questions for Chief Chrisman?
Chairman Rogers, I have one. Just is more of a curiosity question than anything else.
Yes, sir.
Does or would these towers have the availability to cohabitate with cell towers where you could utilize maybe funds that from rent of those cell towers to help pay for?
Help defray the costs?
Yeah.
That's a possibility, Mr. Halliburton. I think one of the things that's at issue here, and we've already experienced it a time or two, is these towers will be designed with critical placement of not only antenna for broadcast and receive capabilities, but they also will incorporate point-to-point microwave communication. Right now, in a lot of locations, two-way radio communication is a function of wire telephone lines, which is becoming more and more cost prohibitive as we lease those lines from AT&T. Point-to-point microwave allows us to own that technology and then have not only ownership and maintenance of it, but critical placement of those components on the towers that maximize public safety communication, lack of distortion in the communication networks, and so forth and so on. In some of the tower locations that we looked at in cohabitation arrangements, the owner of the tower dictates placement of the antenna, the microwave dishes, and the other things, not to mention the fact that there's some significant security that's involved here. One of the reasons why we have approached construction and ownership of the towers by the city for its public safety functions is that gives us the ability to determine who cohabits, co-locates, under which conditions and under what applications. And I would submit respectfully that there's a legitimate public safety interest in that ownership arrangement. I will tell you that two-way radio communications is an omnipresent kind of a need for public safety all across Rutherford County. And to that end, we've had some significant discussions with the sheriff and members of the Sheriff's Department staff about how this critical infrastructure, as it's designed and implemented, could be of assistance to the Sheriff's Department as they begin to grow their communications and may need to cohabit on some of these sites as well, just in furtherance of that county-wide public safety mission. Does that answer your question?
It does. Believe me, I can understand why the city would want ownership and control of placement and who would come on and off the tower or who would be able to utilize the tower. I do think, though, that if it's possible and you do have control over it and can generate some fees from it, that, you know, as part of the engineering process and where the placement of these towers would be, if there are other people that would like to come on board, I think it's definitely a route to go.
And there have been some discussions with regard to that. Mr. Halliburton, I suspect that there will be more.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You touched on the county's involvement or possible use of these. Are they using a similar system now, or will it piggyback this system, or they duplicate this type of system?
Mr. Young, the county is still using a UHF frequency, as we are at this point. There is a simulcast system, tower system, that has been proposed and funded in part with some 911 monies that will provide some infrastructure coverage and some communications capacity in those remote areas of the county where they've had some serious problems with two-way radio signal transmission. So I think they're hopeful that that will provide a near-term solution for some of their communication needs for the Sheriff's Office and for EMS and for their other responders. Frankly, we are fortunate to be a little ahead of the game with the technology that we're talking about using here. And I think as they look potentially in the future at upgrading their system and adding extra capacity and coverage, that these sites may be of benefit to them. And as I say, we've had some discussions. It's early yet, and funding is an issue that they're struggling with.
Okay.
Chief, let me ask you about tower location and the
Yes, sir.
tower design.
Yes, sir.
And I guess talk first about the Jones Boulevard location. Were there other locations evaluated by Motorola or the city?
There were. Actually, one of the locations that we looked at right in the downtown area here that we thought would have been an excellent choice was the old Middle Tennessee Electric membership tower that's at the housing location right near your office. And we looked at taking that tower down and erecting a 150-foot tower there as a very centralized location. Unfortunately, some of the things that we ran into there were placement. There are some underground fuel tanks there that brought up other environmental issues that would have to have been dealt with. And that location was a little bit closer to the flight path for the central part of the city, and I think that raised some issues. And then being downtown, I think, was somewhat of an issue as well. When we panned back a little bit, I think we began to look at other locations in the area, and that's what led us back to the fire station over at Mitchell-Nielsen, and Bill may want to add to this discussion. As you recall, they previously had a 90-foot tower at that location that had been damaged by storm. And my recollection is they were desirous of replacing or doing something different with that site anyway. And when we began to look at alternate locations for this inner city tower, if you will, that one kind of had a dual purpose and thought it might be well suited for that location. Okay. But we did look at some other ones, yes, sir.
Tower design. We see a lot of cell tower applications over the years, and we have tried to, I guess, make those tower designs as aesthetically pleasing as possible. Mm-hmm. This one looks just like a metal grid tower going up. Have we looked at other designs that maybe are, the cell towers, we talk about monopole designs where it's just one pole. Almost sometimes they can make them look like flag poles. They can make them look like trees, I've heard. But something that's a little more not towerish?
While I'm answering, I'll invite Bill or Lieutenant Watson, either one, to step up and add to this. I don't know that we have specifically, because part of what will happen, particularly with the larger towers, the 300-foot towers that we'll discuss in just a little bit, is we're talking about putting 6-foot diameter microwave dishes at significant heights on those towers to enable not only microwave transmission of that signal from point to point, but as was indicated, I think, in the staff notes, or maybe it was in part of Bill's comments, one of the problems with two-way radio communication is what happens if your tower gets blown down or gets blown up. What happens to your radio communications? And the design of this system is such that if for whatever reason one tower gets taken offline by an electrical shortage, maybe the generator doesn't fire, whatever, you got a tower in the system that's out of commission, then the communications network continues because all of the other tower sites continue to function as normal. A lot of that links back to the microwave system, which links back to the size of the transmission disk, which links back to wind resistance, shear, those kinds of things, particularly at elevation. So the, if I could describe it this way, the utilitarian design, if you will, of the tower, I think is such that it's intended to manage those loads and also hopefully function with as little maintenance and management is necessary over time. I mean, these systems will be there a long time.
The microwave dish, that's something the city police department requires. That's just a component of the communications, right?
Again, as I say, right now we're buying line space from AT&T, and physically what happens is when a dispatcher pushes a button to transmit a radio message, goes out through a communications line, just like a telephone line, to a tower, rebroadcast at the tower, and then broadcast over the air. Tremendously inefficient in some ways. It's worked well over time, but it's not the best current solution because, number one, you have recurring costs for the line space monthly. There are a lot of issues that are created with static on those lines. They're also subject to being disabled for a number of reasons. So what microwave will allow us to do is do all of that wirelessly, point to point, distributed amongst the tower network across that urban boundary area, which will result in a cleaner, more audible signal with less spurious kind of line noise, and again, give us control of that infrastructure and that equipment.
All right. Any other questions for Chief Chrisman? All right. Thank you, sir.
Sorry for the technical descriptions, but thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you. All right. At this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. If you have any comments, if you would begin by giving us your name and your address, please.
My name is Terry West. This is my wife, Mary. We live on the corner of Clark and Jones Boulevard, right across from the fire station. We've been there 45 years. I certainly agree with the need to upgrade the communications in the police department. I support that fully. But the location of this tower and this large fenced-in area and the building, I don't think is suitable for the community in which we live. You're talking about a quite a bit larger fenced-in area. Right now, they play ball there, baseball, softball, football. The kids going to school walk across that area. It's just a nice green area in the community, and I don't think it would be suitable for this massive fenced-in area and storage building. I just think that would look bad in our community. And also, I don't see why other locations could not be used. The city owns property behind Hardee's, which is pretty close to what we're talking about now. On the Hardee's on Broad Street. And so it just seems to me that this is an inappropriate location for such a tower. I'm sure it's needed, and I support that, but I just don't think it's the proper location. And another location I think would be more suitable as far as the community in which we live.
I'd like to add to that, too. I wonder how it's going to affect us environmentally. You're talking about microwave. We have lots and lots of children out on the playgrounds in the Mitchell-Nielsen area. They play there every day, rain or shine almost. And I know that if you've got a microwave or these waves coming off of the tower, I'm asking how is it going to affect our health and our environment, noise-wise, what kind of noise is going to be emitted from this tower, light-wise, light pollution. Are there going to be flashing lights on this tower, and are they going to affect us at nighttime? Those kind of things I'm very, very much concerned about as far as, and to me it will be an eyesore. It takes away this small, it's a very small green space here right in the center of our community. We've been there 45 years. That's our home. We surely would be distressed to have something interfere with our health and the children there in the community from the elementary as well as the primary schools. We notice also that the tower that was constructed before, there's weeds around that fence now. I'm wondering who's going to maintain and how often are they maintaining that. It, to me, will be just an eyesore. I thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. and Ms. West. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against the application?
Chairman Rogers, my name is Randy Johnson. While I don't live right across from the tower, I grew up there. And I still live in the general neighborhood. My sister and her husband own a house right across from this site. And while I certainly appreciate Chief Christman's remarks, I've been through some of their programs, and I see a need for what they want to do. I'm a little disappointed that I'm not hearing more coordination with the county and getting everybody together on this. But in terms of the tower and the surrounding building that the West have very well stated, seems to me it's a little bit more of an eyesore in the community, in the neighborhood, than the tower that was there before. The tower that was there before was strictly a tower. It was straight up, had a little spire on the top of it. There was no surrounding building. There were no microwave dishes, no lights required. And I think, you know, one of the things that I saw when I first came in, the video that played, was making Murfreesboro a better place to live. And I think putting something like this in a residential area is not making Murfreesboro a better place to live. I think as we look around town, we see these towers more in commercial areas. You know, you see them out Memorial Boulevard, you see them out 840, out 96, out Shelbyville Highway. And I think, as Mr. West said, the city owns quite a bit of property here in town. And even though, and I appreciate somebody's comment, were other sites considered, Murfreesboro Housing Authority, interesting, I was thinking on the way down here, would be a perfect site. It's, you know, it's close to the center of town. Okay, they're underground fuel tanks. There may be some obstacles to overcome, but is it not better to work to overcome some obstacles than to drop this unsightly tower in the middle of a neighborhood? And I would ask each of you to think, you know, would you want this across from your house? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
My name is Kay McDaniels, and I live on Jones Boulevard, very close to the 164-foot water tower, which we had built in our neighborhood not too long ago. We already suffer the unattractiveness of this water tower that is way much bigger than the one that was there. kids throw things over the fence at the water tower. You know, teenagers, as they drive down the road, throw bottles, throw paper and stuff, and it becomes unsightly. And nobody comes to pick it up from the city, but maybe once a month or so. Also, the use of that green space that everybody's talking about. In the summertime, the rec department shows movies, movies under the stars, there by the school, at the primary school, to the side of the fire hall. But the kids are playing down there all the time. Twice a year at least, the primary school uses it. Once for their fall festival, and they use off that area back there, sometimes behind the fire hall. Then the fire hall puts on a water event for the school at the end of the school year, and it takes up most of that area. There are also, as Mr. West said, people that are practicing for ball, soccer, say baseball and everything. And some of the places where they play and where they practice are going to be taken up, because if the ball diamond is being used, then they move down to the other side nearer towards Jones, and they play out there. So there'll be sometimes 3 teams practicing. So you're going to really impact a lot of people that use that for recreational purposes. And the kids come and fly kites in the spring. They're not going to be able to do that anymore. So, I mean, you know, this is it's an area that really gets used a lot more than you would think. So I just wanted to ask you to please consider the Hardee's area, or down on Medical Center Parkway, the area that y'all now have as a retention pond for the overflow from the water on the Medical Center Parkway. Surely some of that area could be used. You know, down by Office Depot and behind the Burger King, there's a lot of land down there that could be utilized. So just please think about not putting it in our area. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. McDaniels. Anyone else wish to speak for or against this application? All right. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion. Were you going to say something, Matthew?
Yeah. Chairman Rogers, there were a few things that were brought up that I think we can address. I think Mr. Bill Terry of the police department will be an appropriate person to answer several of these questions. But it was brought up that what would the noise and lighting impacts be? And I believe that the generator will generate some noise, and the lighting. I'm looking at the FAA's determination, and it says, based on this evaluation, marking and lighting are not necessary for aviation safety. However, if marking or lighting are accomplished on a voluntary basis, we recommend it be installed and maintained in accordance with FAA advisory, et cetera, et cetera. Mr. Terry, could you address the noise and the lighting issues as to whether or not what I've said would be correct?
Yes, I'd be glad to, Matthew. As far as noise, the tower itself should not generate any noise. As far as the antenna structures, the microwave, the RF, as Mr. Blomley said, there will be a generator at that location to give emergency power in the event of an electrical disruption. And that is actually one of the main reasons why we chose Station 4 for the location of that tower. It is our intent to not only power the tower with the generator, but also to power Station 4. So in the event of a catastrophic incident where we were without power, we would have an emergency operations center at Station 4. That station would be fully powered as far as heat, air, lights, the doors, all operations. And the fire department could use that as a command center in the central part of town. To go back to one of your earlier questions about different types of towers, we looked at monopoles. Typically what you see with a monopole is when a cell company will put one in place for just receive transmit only in a location where they can put a small microwave dish on it, point to point back to their central office. they don't really work well with a larger microwave dish. That point-to-point, there is a very small range as far as the communication path, and that tower needs to be very substantial and not very little movement involved in that. Which also comes back to play with the microwave. It is point-to-point microwave, so there's very little radiant transmission. It's very singular in its directional path.
How about light? I think Ms. West was asking about light.
And as far as the light, it was our intent to put the red flashing light on the top of the tower, very similar to what's on top of the water tank. There is a light on the water tank that flashes red at night for safety purposes.
Chief Chrisman mentioned the Housing Authority. Were there any other locations explored besides the Housing Authority?
We looked at the Housing Authority. We looked at the fire station on Vine Street, the fire headquarters. We looked at some property further down on Vine Street that the city has taken possession of. We were trying to stay out of the historical area to keep the towers out of historical zoning. And primarily the big concern was the fall zone. It's our intent, all of the towers will be spec'd with a 50% fall radius. So 150-foot tower will be spec'd to fall at 75 feet. The 280s will be spec'd to fall at 140. Looking at station at the headquarters, even the Housing Authority had some concern, and the site further out Vine Street, trying to get a tower that would stay within our property in the event of a failure.
Is there anything that, I can understand the people's concern about the aesthetics of it,
yes, sir,
particularly, and that water tank already treads pretty heavily on them in that area. Is there anything we can do at all, whether it be look at if there's other locations that haven't been explored, or if there are designs that we haven't considered? Is there anything we can do to try to mitigate or eliminate this on them? Is this our absolutely only option?
According to the Motorola engineers, this was the optimal spot to be able to get the most building penetration for the center of Murfreesboro. And that's primarily what this site is for. That is to be able to cover that inner city in-building coverage. I think the tower site itself, the buildings, the generator, the fencing, all of that will be covered. We will cover that with evergreen material so that as it matures, you will not be able to see inside the area. Of course, the tower is a tower. It's hard to cover a 150-foot tower. Although, as we said, we had a 90-foot tower there before that we were using for some wireless capability. When that site was damaged, we were looking to repair that 10-foot section. However, that was just about the time that we were starting the radio project. So we did hold off on that, thinking that would be an ideal site for future radio communications. And we also, and if you notice on this particular site, the kind of the oblong shape of the fencing area, it was a 55 by 75, I believe, or 50 by 70, Matthew?
Yeah, by 75.
We actually did it kind of that oblong so that we would stay out of the ball field area to try to mitigate that a little bit and have it more toward the road and to give them more room for the green space.
I don't think anybody doubts the need for it. I think everybody absolutely understands that. I guess the question is if Motorola engineers considered everything, not sure they considered what we have to consider, and that is the impact on the surrounding property. Is this a time-critical decision that we have to make? When are we looking at starting construction and completing this network?
We're hoping to go out for bid on the towers within the next 45 to 60 days. I mean, we're behind where we need to be. As Chief Christmas said, we are desperately in need of some redundancy for our voice communications. It's a critical nature right now.
Chairman Roger, I have a question. Two questions. We haven't gotten to these other sites yet, but looking at the agenda, I can't tell, are these other sites going to be proposed to be located on city-owned property or not necessarily?
All four of these sites are on city-owned property.
Okay. That answers that question. There was a comment about the emissions of this microwave. There's no, are there any health hazards that we know of that are related to these emissions of the microwave?
Not that we're aware of.
Okay.
Given the fact that we're considering 4 towers, I guess, and part of a network, would it be appropriate to hear the next application, hear all 3 applications, I suppose, all 4, and then vote on each one individually after we hear all 4?
I don't see anything wrong with hearing the others before voting. Each one, of course, will stand on its own to a large extent, but it is brought forth and designed to be a system to all work together too. See anything wrong with deferring the vote until after hearing the other applications?
Yeah.
If the board wishes to do that, you may.
Anybody have an objection to doing that? Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Terry? All right. Thank you, sir. Did you all have comments on this particular location here on Jones Boulevard?
Yes, sir. Could I have just a second?
Well, we've already closed the public hearing on it. All right.
Can I just ask one question? How much difference would 2 miles make southwest?
They could ask their question in the next public hearing.
Southwest location that's 2 miles away.
Let's do this. We're going to have 3 more public hearings with regard to each one of these applications. So we need to tailor our comments to each particular location during the public hearing, but we'll try to consider that if you want to bring it up with regard to some of these other ones. We've already closed the public hearing on the first one. Okay. All right, then, unless there's any objection, we'll go ahead and next and consider application Z13052, again by Mr. William Terry for the City of Murfreesboro, making the following request for property located in a residential single-family RS-15 zone at the northwest corner of Forretress Boulevard and Blaze Drive. He's requesting there a special use permit in order to construct this telecommunications tower, and secondly, a 265-foot variance from the minimum 35-foot maximum permitted building height. All right, Mr. Blum, if you'd any comments on this particular location?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The subject property is located at the northwest corner of the intersection of Forretress Boulevard and Blaze Drive. It's on property that the city owns and that was approved by the board in 2008 for the construction of a police precinct. That police precinct has never moved forward in construction, but according to city administration, it is still within the city's capital improvement plan and will likely move forward at some point in the future. Property is currently vacant is currently not improved. The city wishes to construct a 300-foot tall tower. That 300-foot height includes the tallest appurtenances. So the tower structure itself may be a little bit shorter than that, but the appurtenances on top will bring the total height to 300 feet. A special use permit is required, as well as a 265-foot height variance from the 35-foot maximum permitted building height in the RS-15 zone. The subject property is adjacent to the Blackman High School on its west side, the Blackman Middle School on its south side. Catty corner southeast of the subject property is Blackman Elementary School. To the north is undeveloped property that is owned by the city, which contains Puckett Creek and the floodway of Puckett Creek. This tower compound will be 60 by 65 feet, and it will be fenced and screened in the same manner as the previous application. This particular tower site will be approximately 600 feet from Blaze Drive. And you'll see I have the site plan posted right now on the TV screen. As you can see, it's about 600 feet away from the right-of-way of Blaze Drive and over 300 feet away from the high school property. It is on the north end of the subject property. The letter has been, letter from the FAA stating that the proposed tower will have no hazard, as well as a letter from Mr. Chad Gerke from the airport stating that it will have no negative impact on the Murfreesboro Municipal Airport. Portions of the proposed fall zone are located on the property to the north, which, as mentioned earlier, is also owned by the city. But, however, if the tower is designed to collapse at a smaller fall zone radius, it may indeed end up being contained all within the subject property. The height variance is due to the fact that in order for this system to work effectively, the tower needs to be of a certain height so that it can exceed the height of foliage and structure, so that it can communicate with the other proposed communications towers. Both the special use permit and height variance request will require separate motions. If the board approves the special use permit request, staff recommends the following condition: that all other applicable state and federal approvals for the proposed tower must be obtained. And, of course, you've already seen the pictures of the tower that is similar to what they are looking to construct. These are photographs of the subject property. This is looking west at the subject property from Forretress Boulevard. Once again, looking west from Forretress. This is looking south toward the intersection of Blaze and Forretress. Looking north at the subject property from Blaze. And then looking northwest at the subject property from Blaze, you can see that there is a tree line that runs in between this property and the high school property. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer questions before or after the public hearing, and Chief Chrisman and other representatives of the police department are here as well.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley?
I have one. The current site, what is it used for now, or is there any use on this site currently?
It appears that there is some farming occurring on the property right now, but it is undeveloped. There are no structures in the property. But the western, maybe 40% of the property is where the proposed police precinct would be located. But as of right now, this would be the only structure on the property.
But the farming that's going on is going on city-owned property, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
All right. Chief Chrisman, anything you wanted to add to this application? No. Thank you. Okay, then at this time we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this particular application located at the intersection of Blaze Drive and Blackman Forretress Boulevard? All right. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed. I don't know if the board feels it's appropriate to go ahead and vote on this particular application. We have, I think, We have two components to this application. If we want to take it up now, or do we want to postpone it?
I think since we chose to postpone the first one, it'd be best to go ahead and postpone this one as well.
I would agree.
All right. All right.
That's fine.
No objection? Okay, then we'll go ahead and move on to the next application, Z13053, again by Mr. Terry for the City of Murfreesboro, making a request for property located in a residential single-family RS-15 zone along the north and east sides of Central Valley Road, northeast of the Liberty Station subdivision. Again, requesting a special use permit in order to construct a telecommunications tower, a 265-foot variance of the 35-foot maximum permitted building height, and finally a variance from the ordinance which states that telephone and telegraph transmission towers over 100 feet in height shall be set back in addition to the yards required by the regulations of the district in which the towers are located, 1 foot for every 3 feet in height over 100 feet. The applicant is requesting a 53-foot variance of the minimum required 97-foot rear building setback, ultimately. Okay. All right, Mr. Blum, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. I try to make the headings as long as possible.
Yeah, excellent work.
Thank you. The subject property is located along the north side of Central Valley Road, as you mentioned, just to the northeast of the Liberty Station subdivision. This is property that the city owns, and as you can see on the aerial photograph in front of you, the location where the word site is located is approximately where the tower is proposed to be constructed. As you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of the page is the Liberty Station subdivision, and to the north and to the northeast of the subject property is Corps of Engineers property, and you can see the river runs just to the north and northeast of the subject property. The applicants are proposing a 300-foot tower at this location, just as with the last location. And it would be for the same purposes as the previous two locations that we have discussed. Proposed tower is located approximately 1,000 feet from Central Valley Road. I'll pull up the site plan. You can see the proposed driveway that would lead back from Central Valley Road all the way to the tower site. The tower site is positioned directly along the rear property line, which is adjacent to the Corps of Engineers property. The tower and the accessory structures will be contained within a 60 by 70 fenced-in area. Considering that the proposed location is remote from Central Valley Road and from many nearby residences, staff is not of the opinion that landscape screening should be required around this particular site. And it should be noted that there are existing mature trees to the northeast on the core property. The applicant has submitted his determination of no hazard from the FAA, as well as the letter from Mr. Gerke from the airport. One thing I will mention about this particular site, or a couple things about this particular site, is that, first of all, the location of the proposed tower on this site, it's somewhat indeterminate at this point. As I mentioned, it is shown on the site plan to be 44 feet from the rear property line, hence the request for the rear setback variance that Chairman Rogers went over a moment ago. But in reviewing the site plan for the proposed tower, staff has looked at the proposed fall zone radius of the tower, which, as of right now, the fall zone radius appears to cross the property line onto the core property, and so we are looking at the possibility of perhaps moving that tower about 110 feet further in from that rear property line, which would still put it at about 900 feet from Central Valley Road. However, our legal department and others will be reviewing the site plan with regards to the fall zone, as well as we are still awaiting an actual fall zone determination from a structural engineer. So the location that we bring to you today for this particular site, while it's shown as being as close as 44 feet from the rear property line, hence the 53-foot rear setback variance, it could be as perhaps as far away as 150 feet from the rear property line, in which case the rear setback variance would not be needed. But because there's still about perhaps a 100-foot difference in where the tower may actually be located as opposed to where it is shown on the site plan, staff has brought the rear setback variance to you as well as a worst-case scenario for what setback variance they would need. The reason that they have ideally situated it so deep on the property is that for one, they are looking to push it as far away from the existing subdivision as possible. And two, the proposed tower is located on property identified as the potential location of a police and fire training center. A rough layout for the potential training center facility is depicted on the site plan for informational purposes only. It should be noted that this layout is preliminary, and if the city decides to pursue the site for the training center, it will require separate application to the board for a special use permit. So in trying to efficiently use land, this is where that they have determined the proposed tower location to be best suited for that property. But as I mentioned, the layout shown for the training center on the site plan is very preliminary in nature, and whether it will be located on this property or at this particular point on this property is all just very preliminary in nature. So that's more or less for informational purposes is the reason why it is shown on the site plan. If each of these requests will require separate motions. If the board approves the special use permit request, staff recommends the following condition. All other applicable state and federal approvals for the proposed tower must be obtained. And I'll show you some photographs of the site right now. This is looking east at the subject property from Central Valley Road. Central Valley Road does a 90-degree turn to the north, so this is looking at the property from its very westernmost point. And this is looking southeast at the subject property with Liberty Station in the background. And this is looking north at the subject property. You'll see the silo on the subject property. That is one of the landmarks on the property that most people are familiar with when I tried to explain to them the proposed tower location. The tower would be far to the north and east of that proposed silo. And this is looking northwest at the subject property from Central Valley Road, and looking west down Central Valley Road south of the subject property, and the Liberty Station subdivision south of the subject property. Now I'm going to jump back to the aerial photo, which I think after seeing those photos from the ground will help you to visualize where the tower will be located. You'll see here where my cursor is located is the silo site the silo that you saw on the photograph, and the tower would be located back in this area here adjacent to the core property. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Chief Crispin, anything you would like to add to the application?
No, sir, not at this time.
Thank you. Okay, then at this time we'll conduct a public hearing as it pertains to this property located along the north and east sides of Central Valley Road. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against that application?
Good afternoon, Chairman. My name is Andrew Donnelly. I reside at 5256 Reagan Drive in the Liberty Station subdivision. I'm in support for this new system. I do know the infrastructure needs updating, so I do understand the need for these towers, but I am opposed to this location. The first and primary reason is that I don't believe this location requires a hardship to the height restrictions. The city owns many, many acres of land just to the west of this location. Is that correct? That is nowhere near any of these height restrictions. So the city can easily use that land right there that will not be by any of the existing subdivisions that are to the far west of their city, and to the south, which is the Liberty Station and Liberty Valley subdivisions. My other concern is that out of that forest there, out of that land by the barn there, there's a family of bats that come out. And I don't know if the microwave transmissions will affect those bats. And they come out about every evening at dusk. I know engineers usually don't go out at that time, but and survey the property. That's something that I do know that is in this area. I was concerned about the noise from the generator, but it seems if it's as far back as it is, there probably that noise, the decibel level, probably won't affect that neighborhood. But I just want to make sure that if it does go in, that there's mufflers and other devices that go in that will limit the sound decibels from that emergency generator. But he can probably talk to you about the many, many other locations and land that is available. But the height restrictions and the special zoning ordinance was put in place for a reason, and that's to keep towers and other high things away from neighborhoods. I'm an architect. I'm a registered architect, and I deal with setbacks, height regulations all the time, and I realize that sometimes there's hardships. The main tower inside the city, that's a hardship. I mean, that's a hardship to overcome there. Out in the country, there's absolutely no hardship with the land that the city has available to it, that the city owns out there. And it's just maybe a quarter mile to the west of that location. And that would still meet the regulations that you, the city, had set up for towers. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against this application? All right. Then, without objection, we will consider the last tower application, and it is Z13054, again by Mr. Terry for the City of Murfreesboro, requesting a special use permit in order to construct this telecommunication tower. And this is for property located in a park zone along the west side of Shelbyville Pike. All right, Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. If I could address one thing the previous speaker said, the other property that the city owns in the immediate vicinity of this property, or the property on Central Valley Road, is all zoned RS-15. So regardless of where on that property a tower was proposed, it would require the same two things, a special use permit and a height variance. So I just wanted to clarify that.
I got a sense, though, from his comments that putting it on that property would locate it even further from residential property.
Right, and I'm not disputing that. I understood him to say that the same height restrictions that would apply to the subject property at hand would not apply to other property that the city owned in the immediate vicinity.
I got you. I guess while we're on it then, let's talk about that for just a second. Was that the property that Mr. Donnelly talked about, do you know if it was considered for this particular tower?
I think that Mr. Terry or Chief Chrisman would need to address that.
Okay.
Chairman, actually the property was considered, and we actually had an FAA determination made on the property to the west. We chose to relocate to the existing location because of the potential for the training center somewhere down the road. We were trying to maximize use of electricity, the roads, and all of the infrastructure so that we're going to have to put all of that in anyway, and it made sense for us to put the tower at the same location that some other buildings may be so that we didn't have to duplicate efforts on that. One of the other issues with the property to the west is that is where Murfreesboro Water and Sewer disperses the repurified water, and obviously water and communication equipment don't mix well. We had picked a location that they don't disperse a lot of water. However, those water cannons have a tendency to have some blow when the wind picks up, so that was a little bit of concern for us. However, the main reason was to not have to duplicate efforts on expense for the infrastructure.
Okay.
And if I may, the young lady, she had a question earlier about moving the Jones Street Tower, 2 miles east, 2 miles west. If I may just real briefly on that, just to clarify, the microwave is point to point, and one of the items that the Motorola engineers obviously look at is obstructions between the sites. All of the sites have 2 dishes on them, so that we have 2 paths out of each tower site. So actually moving towers, even a couple of 200 or 300 feet, can be detrimental to that path. So when we were looking at the sites, we tried to pick the sites that gave us clear line of sight from point to point, so that we wouldn't have anything in the way.
How would that affect on this tower that we just discussed with regard to the setback? Is there any effect if that tower was to move 150 feet when we're in
No,
there?
ma'am. No, we could do that. We chose that particular spot mainly because we knew that it was Corps of Engineer property on the other side, and there is really only about 30 foot of usable land on the Corps side before it has a pretty drastic drop to the river. We knew there would not be any development back there, so we weren't really concerned. It's really not a safety issue because of the location. It's very remote and not a lot of activity. However, in talking to Mr. Blomley and staff, if you feel the need, then we will locate it the 150 foot so that the tower would stay within our property lines.
As it's proposed, how far is that tower from the closest residential property or house?
I have to defer to Mr. Blomley, but I believe we're at about 1,000 feet, if my memory serves me right,
okay,
from Liberty. Is that correct, Mr. Blomley?
Yeah. Chairman Rogers, the way I've scaled it, it's about 1,000 feet, approximately 1,000 feet from the Liberty Station subdivision, which is the nearest subdivision. I believe that there is a house on the property to the south, and it appears that it would be approximately, I'm guessing maybe 500 or 600 feet from the proposed tower location.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Terry? All right. Thank you, sir. Okay, so Matthew, I think we're going to discuss this application Z13054, the tower in the park zone along Shelbyville Pike.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. You'll notice that there is only one component to this application, and the reason is because in the park zone there is no maximum building height. So the applicant has requested a special use permit in order to construct the telephone and telegraph transmission facility, and I'm scrolling down in there we go. This is about as far south as the city limits go. It's the very southeastern corner of the Barfield Crescent Park property. And if you drive down Shelbyville Pike, you'll notice there is a driveway that kind of goes up a bluff The bluff is right off the shoulder of Shelbyville Pike, across the street from the Rutherford County Quarry, and that driveway actually goes up into the park property, and that is approximately where, not approximately, but exactly where the access would be to this proposed tower. The property, or the tower location would be approximately 200 to 220 feet off of the front property line of along Shelbyville Pike. It would be, and there are no minimum setback requirements in the P zone either, so there's no need for any type of setback variances. The tower will be contained within a 60 by 65 foot fenced-in area, and access to the tower site will be via the existing driveway off of Shelbyville Pike. The existing driveway is gravel, but will be paved in conjunction with this project. The fencing manner will be the same, or it will be fenced in the same manner as the previous towers. Because the site is already heavily vegetated, the applicant does not propose any additional landscape screening on site. The applicant does, however, intend on constructing an earthen berm in between the tower site and the nearby park trail to the west. The tower height is proposed at 300 feet, the same as the previous two applications, and the applicant has submitted his determination of no hazard from the FAA, as well as the letter from Mr. Gerke of the airport. The site plan depicts the full 300-foot fall zone radius for the proposed tower, with it being 217 feet off of the front property line along Shelbyville Pike. A portion of that fall zone is located in the state right-of-way of Shelbyville Pike. However, if the tower is designed to collapse at its halfway point, the fall zone radius would be entirely contained within the subject property. If the board approves this request, staff recommends the following condition: all other applicable state and federal approvals for the proposed tower must be obtained. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley?
And I do have some photographs to get you oriented. There's the driveway that I was referring to going up that bluff. And then looking at the subject property, you can see it is heavily vegetated. And this is looking back at Shelbyville Pike from the subject property. And looking northeast across Shelbyville Pike, you can see the entrance to the convenience center. And then just beyond those trees is the county's quarry operations. Thank you.
All right. Questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, then at this time we'll conduct a public, Chief Chrisman, anything you all would like to add to this application?
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, then at this time we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, since you deferred votes on the...
If you want to come up to this so we can hear you in the microphone.
Since you deferred votes on the other three, is it appropriate to address the package as a whole at this point?
Sure.
In a public hearing?
Yes, sir.
Again, I fully support Chief Chrisman and what he's trying to do. I've heard a couple of inconsistencies here this afternoon. We've talked about, well, first of all, you've got two towers that are going in very industrialized areas. One tower going in a semi-residential area and one going in a very residential area. There was a comment at Station 4 about that being a command center and needing a generator there, and the generator would be a command center. Chief Chrisman, if I'm correct, you have a command center in the basement of the current police department, a fairly sophisticated command center, if I remember from the Citizens Police Academy tour that I took. Where you would have a generator, you would have that would be the command center rather than probably a fire hall out in a neighborhood, assuming it was available, assuming it had not been damaged. The other fire halls, I believe, do have generators. I'm pretty sure the one out on Memorial Boulevard does. I'm not sure about the others. Station 4 does not have. My experience with generators tells me they have to be tested once a week. They have to be run for about an hour a day or about an hour a week. And thinking about the West concern about noise, once a week, they're going to hear this generator run for an hour. So like I say, my concern about I would hate to see the need for a generator at Station 4 take precedence over the neighborhood aesthetics on that one. We've talked about line of sight communication, and Mr. Terry, you know, I'm sure a lot more than I do about that. However, we've talked about how easy it would be to move the tower, I believe out on Crescent Road, or Crescent Valley Road. We could move that one several hundred feet one way or the other, depending on Corps of Engineers or depending on the training center. But we could not move the one on Jones Boulevard a mile or quarter mile one way or the other. And that seems to be an inconsistency to me. So I guess what, and I know you're behind time-wise, but I guess my request of this group would be, let's send this thing back for a little further study and see if we can't deal with the two neighborhoods that are involved. Maybe, again, Station 4 is optimal, but is there not another place that is equally usable, and also the existing neighborhood at Liberty? So I just ask you to take into consideration the whole package, since you have deferred to vote on all of them.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Chief or Mr. Terry, I guess the question is the ability to move tower in one location versus the inability to move it in another location. Help us understand that, and then also we've got 4 tower locations now. Is the entire network dependent on the precise location of each one of these towers, or is it possible to work with 3 and then determine a 4th one later?
I think
is it all or nothing, I guess?
I don't know that it's all or nothing. I think that the network design has been constructed in a way that it's a package, so to speak. I know with regard to the first location, the Mitchell-Nielsen location, one of the things that was looked at was what is the availability of other space within that portion of the city to provide the building penetration component that we would like to be able to include relative to other property that's owned by the city that would be suitable for that application in that general area. And I know there was some mention about some property over behind Burger King. I know there was some mention about some property behind Hardee's. I don't know how much, if any, of that property the city owns, or if, based on the technical and engineering review that we got from the consultants, if that property was suitable for this kind of development or this kind of tower location. As far as the rest of the network being able to be started and to revisit another location, Bill may be a little better able to speak to that than I am. I don't know that that's an impossibility. Certainly it sets back the process and would, I suppose, put us on the search for other suitable sites. And as we stand here right now, we don't know of any others that the city already owns that would be in that area and suitable for this development. Bill may want to speak to that a little further.
And Chief Christian, that's what I was going to ask you is, ultimately, do you feel like, and I'm particularly concerned about the Jones Boulevard site,
Certainly.
Do you feel like the search for another site there has been exhaustive? I mean, are you satisfied that this is the only location that would serve all the needs of fire and police?
It's the only one I know of as I stand here. I think if we go out and look at existing city properties, which was one of the criterion as we began the search, then I don't know of any other that are available or that would be suitable for this type of location. And certainly the purchase of property is of concern, as is the development of the property for the neighborhoods who have spoken to that issue today. And I think certainly we're sensitive to that as well. Bill, you may have something to add to that. But as I stand here, Chairman, that's the only one that I know of that's in the area that's deemed to be optimal from the engineering standpoint from the consultants that we've spoken with. And there have been several others that have been taken into consideration as we searched.
Chairman, if I might interject, I am fairly confident that the city does not own any of the property that's behind the Hardys off of Broad
Street.
That's private. There is a drainage easement and there's a sewer easement across that property, I know. But that property, I believe, if the city owns any of it, it's a very, very small part of it. And with regard to the property that's behind Burger King, that is also privately owned, and it's a drainage pond. That is a detention pond which frequently has a substantial amount of water in it, which is not exactly the ideal place to have a communications tower equipment and its equipment located. Now, I'm sure we could jack that up 20 feet in the air or something like that, but that really doesn't make a lot of sense. And it'll be a far bigger eyesore to the other side of this neighborhood than would be the property that's there at the fire station, which is already publicly owned and dedicated to public use, and this is a logical, appropriate place to put it. You know, we put a man on the moon. We can do anything with enough time and enough money, but this project has been in research for some period of time, and I'm pretty confident that our consulting engineers have looked at pretty much all the reasonable options for locating these sites.
If I may, one of the things that we did when we originally sent the information to Motorola to give us a study on coverage, I had our GIS department pull down the maps of just a city-owned property, and we sent that to Motorola and actually let them pick the locations based on their expertise and what would be the best coverage for the city. That way, while we had some input into it, we let them be the ones that actually said, these are your prime locations for those sites. Our only stipulation was we would prefer it to be on city-owned property if at all possible.
This may seem silly, but I'll ask it anyway. Was the water tower that's so close considered as a co-location possibility? I mean, I know you've got probably blocking transmissions, but just with it being so close.
Water towers, typically there's some shadowing issues with coverage when you locate a RF on top of a water tank. So that would require some additional equipment that would have probably been less sightly than the tower, just to be honest. And one thing to consider as well, we're talking 150 foot. That's what we're asking for Jones. The tower will be 130 foot, with the antenna being the remaining 20 feet, fiberglass whip antenna. The existing tower that's there stands at 90 feet. So really we're only looking at about a 40 foot or about 40 foot additional.
The tower as it now stands broken off?
As it was in place.
Okay.
Originally it stood at 90 feet. So
Gotcha.
We're asking for about an additional 40 foot over what was already there.
All right. Anything else from the board members? All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Oh, Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I will say one last thing. On the generator, we exercise our generators 20 minutes a week.
Okay.
So they run for 20 minutes a week, and normally we run those during the day so that there's no big impact on the neighborhoods.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Terry. All right. Let's see. I tell you what, we've got 4 applications here. I guess it's not important that we take them in any particular order, so we are, I suppose, ready for either discussions or a motion on one of the applications. If we want to pick them off as we choose. We can do that. Anybody has a particular preference that one they want to take up first? And remember, we do have three of those applications do have separate components that would need to be taken separately.
Well, I figure I'll give it a whirl. I'll start with the Station 4 location. Certainly, it's not easy. Cell towers and these sort of things they're difficult to approach and try to find the best use and then least impact in the surrounding areas. I just feel like with the greater public safety issues that are there, and I feel like the police department has gone about their business trying to find the best location and that makes the most sense. I'm okay with that location, even given the impact there. I think for the greater good, I think that makes sense. So I'll take a stab and make a motion to approve the special use permit, subject to staff comments.
Is that application 053?
51, I'm sorry, 13051.
The Jones Boulevard?
Correct.
Okay.
I'll go and second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the special use permit for the telecommunication tower at the Jones Boulevard location. Any further discussion?
I just have a comment. I agree with Mr. Young on you've got to look at what is the betterment of the whole community. I think, though, if there are aspects that we have control over that would not further the negative impact regarding the neighbors. And one of the things that was brought up by one of the neighbors was the maintenance. In this case, they were using the water tower facility. I think that if, in fact, this does pass, that we need to make some assurances as the city to these neighbors that while that we are approving this for the betterment of the community from a police and fire standpoint across the city, that we need to give as part of an agreement here that we take care of and it doesn't become unsightly, and it's not a once a month thing, it's a once a week thing, because I don't think that's fair to anybody when we would have control over that matter.
And Mr. Halliburton, to speak to your point, I think that you've got members of police administration here. The city administration has been heavily involved with this project, and I'll certainly relay those concerns to them as well, so that those are made of record and that they understand those concerns of the neighbors and of the board.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I just wonder if we could add that as a condition to this motion. Just keeping the grounds clean.
I guess the answer to that is yes, you can. I'm not sure how it would be enforced as a condition. I don't know whether the police department keeps their own grounds, if Parks does that, if Streets does. I don't know who has the lawnmower and the weed eater and the trash ripper, but I think that message is going to be carried through, and I'm pretty confident in all of those groups of people to keep it up, and I expect there'll be some also communication about the status of that water tower site, and if it in fact is a problem, that somebody's going to pay some more attention to that. And you can't go daily and pick up everything every day, but if it's been let go, it shouldn't be, and that message will get passed along too.
Is it appropriate, Mr. Chairman, for me to comment?
Yes, sir.
The subject property is adjacent to the fire station there at Station 4. It's our belief that the fire department will handle the maintenance around that tower facility as they did in the past, and I will communicate that directly to Chief Gaines if that's the direction from the board. I'll communicate it anyway.
I think you're getting some skeptical looks from the west back there. It may not, the current location may not be as maintained as they hope. So maybe even have them look at the current situation.
With the water tower, you mean?
No, sir. With the antenna there that's existing there.
The tower that's immediately behind the fire hall.
Yes, sir.
I will be glad to do that.
Thank you, Chief. Okay. All right. Everybody satisfied with the motion? We ready to vote? Okay.
Are we making it a condition of this motion?
Did you made the motion, did you, Dave?
I made the motion. I did not include maintenance as I'm leaving it as impressing upon the police department and fire department to pay special attention to this residential area. I didn't quite make it a motion because of the enforcement issues at this point.
Okay. Ms. Mosby, okay with that?
I'm fine.
Okay. All right. And let's go ahead and vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Move on to the second component of that application regarding the 115-foot variance of the 35-foot maximum permitted building height.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the 115-foot variance.
Second.
All right. Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. And finally, the variance with regard to detached accessory structures.
Chairman Rogers, I'll make a motion that we approve subject to any staff comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. That application has been approved concerning the Jones Boulevard location. We'll now consider, well, I mean, if the board's okay with this, we'll consider the next application in order, Z13052, regarding the Forretress Boulevard Blaze Drive location.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the special use permit, considering the conditions set by the staff.
I'll second.
All right, motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. The second component is the 265-foot variance of the 35-foot maximum permitted building height.
Make a motion to approve the 265-foot variance, subject to staff comments.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. That application has been approved. We'll next consider application Z13053 and the special use permit for the telecommunications tower there, location being Central Valley Road.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the special use permit with the conditions set by the staff.
Before a second is made, I'd just like to have a little bit discussion on this location. Is there, y'all talked about this a little bit, but I guess there is no means or further discussion of trying to move this further west, even though it would encroach on what is the proposed site for the training center?
Halliburton, there were two things, as Mr. Terry, I think, mentioned. One was the preliminary site plan, if you will, for the training center and the amenities, if you will, that were included in that site plan for potential development. That in combination with the location on this piece of property as it related to co-locating the infrastructure, if you will, and I think Mr. Terry spoke to that a little bit. When we first looked at this, one of the locations was further west, as he mentioned, but it got closer over into the area that was intended for the spray of the repurified water, which is what this property was purchased for by Water and Sewer to begin with. And as we began looking at multi-use applications for that property, the whole farm, how these uses could cohabit on that piece of property, with Water and Sewer having the majority of the usage for what it was bought for, and at the same time, if we could find a location that worked well for the proposed site plan and combine those infrastructure elements all at the same place. There may be other locations on that property that would work well for this tower, but they're not located in such a way that I guess it would maximize or minimize, depending on how you want to look at it, the infrastructure costs of developing it as we move forward with any kind of a training concept.
So what you're saying is that Murfreesboro Water and Sewer will continue to spray on this property even once the training facility is built?
They'll spray on the property to the west of it, which is what was discussed.
So towards the core property?
Well, more west and north of there.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
However, if I may, on the site plan that's included with our agenda material, this property where it says site, that's one portion of the property the city owns. If you go west across the road where it says RS-15, the city also owns that. And if you go then north, up way off of this drawing, the total, I believe, is a little bit over 400 acres.
And if we could put the computer screen up on the television, please.
Okay. So again, this was purchased for the purpose of spraying reuse water on the whole site. There have been, I think, a few discussions in the past that didn't ever go anywhere, partly because of the need for the tower for the communication system. As a follow-up with that, there's been some discussion about the possibility of using I guess depending on your side, it'll be, as I see it, a fairly big training facility, but a very small part of the farm that would be utilized for it. And assuming that does go forward with the training facility, the current design is for the tower to fit right in and be part of that training facility. And if we need to slide the tower further away from the property line in order to facilitate fall zone and maintain all that all on city-owned property, then we may need to redesign some parts of the training facility to move some pieces around. But I would think that would be a moderately easy exercise for a good engineer to move some of the pieces around. But it's not that moving the tower would interfere with the place site.
No, and I would add, Mr. Halliburton, if you go further west, and particularly further northwest toward the back of the property, which was one of the sites that we looked at to begin with, you take it further off of the road, which might be desirable in some regards, but one of the factors to be considered there is the cost of the infrastructure back to it. Particularly, correct me, gentlemen, I want to think we talked about three-phase electric back there, which adds to the expense of the process just simply because of the location and the availability of electricity back there.
Now, am I understanding this right, that the core property is to the east?
Correct.
And does it go to the east across that entire northern property as well, or does it go? Can
we put the computer back up on the screen, please? If you'll see on the exhibit in front of you, the windy piece of property that is adjacent to the subject property all the way from 231 and heading north and west, that entire parcel is a part of the core property. So bordering the subject property on its east and on a portion of the north side of the property.
A larger picture would be handy, but this is the East Fork of the Stones River downstream from Walter Hill Dam, Walter Hill Park. And so it goes basically straight east for a little bit, straight west, then northwest and west, and then there's a large to the north and then a large hook that comes back down. It's the north edge of the farm that the Water and Sewer Department has for the purpose of spraying the reuse water. And again, in some ways it would be great to locate all of this stuff out in the middle of that farm, but then the cost of getting roads and power and other things to it, maybe gas too, is a factor. The other factor is that it's far easier to carve off a corner of the property and let water and sewer use the rest of it than to carve a hole out of the middle of the property and have water and sewer spraying around it. And again, this farm was bought for the purpose of water and sewer reuse spray. It's something the city has to do because we have a limitation on how much of our reuse or how much of our sewer discharge can be put back into the river. So we are forced to, we've bought 2 farms that we're in the process of building the spray sprinkle system to simply dispose of that water, which is also a big reason for all the reuse water that's available out in the gateway for irrigation and that kind of thing, because we got to use it rather than put it back in the river.
Very well said.
I'm very much a layman, but looking at the site plan, it really, if it could be placed near or on where it's labeled potential rifle training, and I'm assuming you're going to have a road that goes back there, that just seems like to me that, but maybe it can't. I don't know.
Mr. Halliburton, I think part of the reason why it was located in that site that you're looking at was for the centrality, if you will, of the infrastructure. Because we know there will be, if that plan is developed as it's proposed, we know there will be a need for a significant amount of electrical power and other utility infrastructure toward the center of that, which is adjacent to the tower site, and that would help minimize those costs as well, as well as access to the tower site for maintenance and security and some other things.
Maybe I'm turned around, but if you moved the site to the west, to the middle of the property that's adjacent to Central Valley Road, would that not be closer to a residential area?
If you move it straight west, it would be closer to more residences, yes.
Okay.
All right.
The motion did.
Well, we've got a motion. Yes, somebody made a motion. I know.
I did.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. We just lack a second, I guess, on this particular motion.
I'll second.
All right. We have a motion and a second to approve the special use permit for the Central Valley Road location. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Chairman Rogers, just for the purpose of minutes, it's been a while since the motion was made. Was that subject to staff comment?
It was.
Thank
Conditions of the staff.
All right. Next component of that application is the 265-foot variance. We have a motion there.
I'll make a motion that we approve the 265-foot variance subject to staff comments.
A second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. And then finally, the component requesting a variance with regard to transmission towers over 100 feet and that particular part of it.
I'll make a motion to approve Part 3 of that application, subject to staff comments. Is that legal?
The 53-foot variance of the minimum required 97-foot rear building setback. Is that fair to say, Matthew?
Correct.
Okay.
And if I may, this should be an up to 53 foot because the location may slide a few feet, maybe 50 feet, you're in more from the property line, but it can't go any closer to the property line than the, was it 44 feet or whatever, but the 53-foot variance.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that application has been approved at Central Valley Road, and finally we'll take on the application for the tower located along Shelbyville Pike.
I think this was the easy one, wasn't it? I'll make a motion to approve the special use permit. And I don't think it was any conditions on that?
Just the same condition that I'd recommended with the other ones.
Okay. With the recommended conditions of the staff.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second there. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that application has been approved as well. I sincerely appreciate everyone's patience on these applications. They were tough to get through, and hopefully we vetted some issues that were important to all of us, I know, as far as public safety as well as aesthetics and making Murfreesboro a better-looking place to live. So I think we've tried as best we can to walk that fine line, and sincerely appreciate your helping in getting that done.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we appreciate you very much. Appreciate the comments from our residents today. We are public servants, and certainly we take those to heart and are concerned about those, and we do our best to be good neighbors all the time. We'll continue to do that. Very much appreciate your thoughtful deliberation and the work of the staff to bring this to you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Chief Chrisman. All right. We'll move on to our final application. It is Z13055 by Mr. Matt Taylor of SEC for River Oaks Community Church. He's requesting a special use permit in order to construct a church in a residential single-family RS-15 zone located at 151 Rucker Lane. All right, Mr. Blum, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Rogers, might I trouble you for a recess?
Of course, absolutely. We'll take a 5-10 minute recess.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
know where the Coke machine is, too.
It's right over there.
Oh.
Sitting out here, I should have drinking.
Oh, yeah, there's
I'd had to have a break an hour ago.
All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting back to order. And we are considering application Z13055 by Mr. Matt Taylor on behalf of SEC and River Oaks Community Church. They're requesting a special use permit to construct a church on property located at 151 Rucker Lane. All right, Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The subject property, as you mentioned, is at 151 Rucker Lane, which is at the southwest corner of the intersection of Rucker and Franklin Road. The property currently contains a single-family home and is also used for agricultural purposes. You'll see on the aerial photograph on the screen before you. The portion of the property that is proposed in this application is the southern half of the property where the label site is. In addition to the southern half of the property, there's a kind of a rectangular appendage that is on the very westernmost portion of the property. We'll see where the cursor is located. That is also a part of this application. There are single-family residential subdivisions located to the west and to the south of the subject property. Directly to the east across Rucker Lane is the Market at Victory Village Shopping Center, which houses a Publix. And to the north are some larger single-family residential tracts, as well as further to the northeast there's a CVS and an Exxon. As you can see here on this exhibit from Mr. Taylor, you'll see the more detailed view of the boundaries of the proposed site. The subject property is zoned RS-15, and institutional group assembly uses, churches, for example, are required to obtain a special use permit from the Board of Zoning Appeals for to be located in an RS-15 zoning district. So the applicant has made a request with the Board of Zoning Appeals for a special use permit for that purpose. Mr. Taylor is representing River Oaks Community Church, and the church proposes to build out the southern portion of the site, which is adjacent to the Birchwood Circle, as well as the residential portion, or the residential subdivision to the west of the subject property, in 3 phases. The building would have 3 phases, and the parking lot would have 3 phases as well. And I'll kind of go over with you the phasing. Phase 1 includes a 10,949 square foot building with a 350-seat auditorium and 154 parking spaces. Phase 2 includes a 10,834 square foot building addition, seating for 350 additional people in the auditorium and 138 parking spaces. Phase 3 includes a 17,840 square foot building addition, seating for 400 additional people in the auditorium and 288 additional parking spaces. When all phases are complete, the total building square footage will be 39,623 with an 1,100-seat auditorium and 580 parking spaces. The applicant is requesting special use permit approval for all 3 phases, in which case, if they don't deviate from this plan, there would be no need, and it's approved, there would be no need for reapplication to the Board of Zoning Appeals at the time each phase is built. The paperwork submitted by the applicant denotes the operating hours and service times for the proposed facility, and the architectural renderings depict the both the front and the south side of the church building, and I'll show those to you right now. This is the elevation of the front of the church building. The building itself is 1 story. There are several features that make certain portions of the building a little bit higher, but the building is 1 story. And you can see they've denoted Phase 1 and Phase 2. The area on the right side of this line would be the Phase 1 construction, and the area on the left-hand side of that line would be the Phase 2 construction. And this is a view of both the front and the side. The materials proposed are brick, ephes, and glass. And as I mentioned, the building is proposed to be 1 story. The building height for the sanctuary area will be approximately 29 feet in Phase 1. And the proposed building is situated approximately 90 feet from the residential lots to the south and over 300 feet from the residential lots to the west. Now to go back to the site plan. The site plan shows 2 driveways off of Rucker Lane, and there is a possibility that there may be access to Franklin Road in the future via the remainder of the subject tract. That would require some type of reworking of the proposed property lines or some type of access easement back to Franklin Road. According to the calculations provided by the applicant, the site far exceeds the minimum parking requirements. The applicant has indicated that there will be child care on site 1 day a week as an accessory use to the church. And the applicant has stated that there will not be accommodations for RV hookups. He says there are proposed speakers at each of the 3 proposed entrances into the building. The speakers will play music and will not be heard across the parking lot, according to the applicant. And the site plan depicts a dumpster enclosure north of the church building away from the adjacent residential subdivisions. The applicant has purposely designed the site to have the dumpster enclosure to the north of the building so that it's away from the property lines adjoining adjacent residential properties. A photometric lighting plan has been submitted. It demonstrates compliance with the maximum lighting level of 0.5 foot candles at the property line. It should be noted that the lighting fixtures will be limited to a maximum of 20 feet in height. The applicant does propose a recreational area in the northwestern appendage of the property, which is that area that I pointed to earlier. The only improvement shown for this recreational area is a pavilion. While the church does not yet have building plans for the pavilion, it has submitted a photograph representative of the type of pavilion it wishes to construct, and I'll show that to you now. I have that up on the screen. With regards to the landscape plan, a Type C buffer is proposed along the south and west property lines adjacent to the developed portion of the site. So, as we look at the very southern property line, there's a Type C buffer proposed as you follow my cursor, and then along the west side of the developed portion of the site. The recreational area, instead of planting a buffer, the church wishes to preserve the existing vegetation where possible, to create a little bit more of a natural feel for that recreational area. If the board approves this application, staff recommends the following condition. A Type C buffer is required along the southern and western property lines, excluding the area denoted as recreation area. Also, the existing tree line and/or vegetation should be preserved along the northern, southern, and western boundaries of the recreation area. Now, I did want to mention that I received an email from an adjacent neighbor to the south on Birchwood Circle, Mr. Charles Culp. That email has been included for the board's reference. Mr. Culp noted his concerns about drainage existing drainage from the subject site, and curious as to how the proposed development would be drained to make sure that it has no negative impact on his property. Mr. Matt Taylor, the applicant, who is also the design engineer for the project, provided an explanation of how he intends to drain the property, and his response has also been included in the agenda package. And staff, in order to address this further, if you have questions of Mr. Taylor, he is here to answer those questions. Staff did provide a copy of Mr. Taylor's response to the city engineer, and Mr. Taylor also spoke with the city engineer, and the engineering department has a comfort level with Mr. Taylor's proposed drainage plan that it will not have any additional negative impact on the adjacent residential properties. Our engineering department feels comfortable that Mr. Taylor can design a drainage plan for the property that will not displace any additional water on the adjacent neighbors' properties. But Mr. Taylor is present if you have any further questions with regards to drainage. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing, and I will show you photographs of the subject property right now. This is looking south at the property from Franklin Road, looking at the existing house on the property. Looking south at the property from Franklin Road once again. Looking west at the subject property from Rucker Lane. And once again looking west. Looking south at the subject property with the residential lots on Birchwood Circle in the background. Looking east across Rucker Lane at the Publix Shopping Center. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley?
Chairman Rogers, I have one. I get why the landscaping buffer is what it is, okay? And understand that there might be a proposed road or cut through at a later date. What do we put in from a security measure if this parcel was to stay as it is? Who's going to be responsible? I realize this is the same owner as we speak today, but it may not be at a later date. So what do we do about the buffer that might need to be between this parcel and the parcel above? Or are we just saying, depending on how this other parcel is developed, they're responsible for the buffer and the church is not responsible for it? How do we address that?
Our thoughts were, with regards to the buffering, is that that property, the existing resident does have a contract with the applicants, and that the current situation is being created by her sale of the property to the applicants, and that a buffer, in staff's opinion, was not necessarily needed along that northern property line.
Okay, but so there's not a measure for the future with respect. It's just going to be up to whatever is done with that property. If Ms. Hudson doesn't keep the property at a later date, for that person to handle the buffer, correct?
Well, there would be no buffer requirement unless the board required a buffer, or unless, because it's both tracts, or the entire tract right now is zoned RS-15. And our zoning ordinance requires buffers based on adjacent zoning districts. In this case, with both properties being zoned RS-15, the board could place a condition of approval that there be a buffer on the church's property adjacent to the property to the north. But absent that, and the properties remaining both zoned RS-15, there would be no buffering requirement along that property.
Well, I don't think that measure is necessary based upon that we don't know exactly what's going to happen if that road's going to be cut through here. I'm just curious as to, okay, you've answered my question. Thank you.
There's no other variances that are needed as far as from property lines, anything like that? No height? There weren't any height issues with this one? It was a single story with an architectural issue?
No variances have been identified, and none are anticipated to be needed. Setbacks are all met. The zoning ordinance does make provisions for ornamental towers of churches to be above the 35-foot maximum building height. I believe makes provisions for them to be up to 70 feet in height. There's a proposed tower feature on this that is, let's see, that is 39 feet 8 inches. And you'll see, if you look at the elevation sheet, there's just one, the very last sheet on the plans that are before you. There is one feature that sticks out a number of feet above the rest of the building. And that's the portion that's almost 40 feet in height. But that would be considered, and it serves no function other than just being an ornamental feature of the building, and therefore is no height variance is required.
I didn't say quite scale. It's 1,500 feet from the corner of the building to the residential property line there. It's got two parking places. And
from the building, it's about, I've scaled it out to be about 90 feet from the property to the south. Is that accurate, Mr. Taylor? And from the building to the property to the west is approximately 300 feet. So at the very nearest, it's 90 feet, and that would be on the south side. Okay.
I think we're all particularly sensitive about churches in residential subdivisions or next door to them anyway. This is a one-story building, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And we are approving nothing closer than 90 feet to the edge of the property line. How much? What's the width of the buffer?
Type C buffer would be 12 feet wide.
Okay, and then so we're looking at quite a bit of parking then between there and the edge of the building.
I'm sorry?
Looking at quite a bit of parking then between the air and the edge of the building.
Yeah, there would be
78 feet.
There would be a row, or there would be parking up against that buffer, then which would be about 19 feet in depth, then about a 22, 24-foot driveway, two-way driveway aisle, and then another row of parking, which would be about 19, 20 feet in depth, and then some green space in between that parking and the building.
Okay.
Do you know how much space there is between the building and the other side, the north side of the building, or the north side edge of the property line?
It appears to be about equidistant.
It's basically the same on both sides. We basically mirrored the property on both sides, made the parking aisles the same width, same amount of grass strip between the building and the parking, and tried to make it symmetrical, for lack of a better term. Church really didn't want to buy any more property than they have to, so we tried to do the minimum, for lack of a better term, there.
And Mr. Taylor, it is correct that the building is one story only?
Yes, just one story with the tower feature that has no other element except for it's an architectural ID point, essentially.
It appears that the auditorium portion of the building is about 28, 29 feet tall. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Is that phase two? Is that what you mean by the auditorium feature?
Each phase has a little bit of auditorium. Phase one has the auditoriums around 350 seats. Phase two would add to that same auditorium. And then whenever phase three came online, they would actually move the entire auditorium to the back and then repurpose the front, what was phase one and phase two, so that all your seats were in the back, and then repurpose the area that was in phase one and two.
Okay.
There's no child care associated with this?
Just the Mother's Day Out program once a week. The rest of it is normal business hours, just a couple of office, just a couple of staff on there during the week.
Lighting in the parking lot?
It will be lit, but everything's less than the 20 feet and not shedding any light across with the photometric plan.
Could you explain to me about the sound that
the speakers?
Mr. Blomley stated that there have been assurances that those speakers won't be hurt by the neighborhood. How do you make those assurances?
I think really with the volume of it at the doorway itself, it's really just meant to make it a tranquil entrance. So they want it to be very low key. It's not going to be out in the parking lot at all. It's 90 to, those entrances are 90 to 100 feet away from the property line itself. Plus you got the vegetation, the buffers, and the cars themselves will help break that up as well.
Are these speakers from the, you're saying that they want it to be a tranquil entrance. Is this separate music from what would be inside the auditorium? Or
I think it would probably be on a recording of some kind. I don't know exactly what song or anything like that, but it'd be some sort of speaker, probably coming out of the roof structure, would be my guess.
And this would be separate from the auditorium sound system?
Yes. It'd be a completely separate system. It would not be,
you wouldn't
hear the preaching.
Preaching or any kind of, if there was a rock band that
Exactly.
played inside the auditorium.
I could imagine that it may actually get turned off after you have the influx of people from during your times coming in.
The only anticipated use for that would be on Sunday morning.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward. Again, state your name and your address for us, please.
Mr. Chairman, members, I'm Charles Culp. I live at 3412 Birchwood Circle. I'm at the southeast corner of that property. My property backs up to theirs. And the major concern that I had was the flooding potential, because my property is low compared to that property. My eastern property line is along Rucker Lane, and there is about a 3.5-foot drop from the surface of Rucker to my side lot, to my property. And there's probably another 1 to 2 foot rise between my property and their property as far as the crest, the crown where their northern edge of their property will be. Their property is going to be all hard surface, going from the agricultural use that it is now, where the ground does absorb any rain, to one that is approximately an acre for just the building itself, plus then all the parking to support that. I am very much concerned about what the drainage will be from that, and because water runs downhill, and I'm downhill, as is Ms. Tibbs at the back corner of the property. And the area that was mentioned, and she'll speak to this later, that was mentioned as for the recreation area. If you go back to the original plans and plats from the county back 40 years ago, that is a retention pond for the drainage for Birchwood Circle. And y'all need to be aware of that too. So I'm concerned about adequate drainage protection for me as well as for my neighbors. And that's something that needs to be addressed, because we are subject to flooding there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Culp.
My name is Regina Tibbs. I live at 3442 Birchwood. If you go back to the original graph of what you showed, I am in the very rear end of the Birchwood where it peaks into the corner. Go up just a little higher, right where it's the sharp corner in the very end. A little higher.
That says Tibbs on that property.
Yeah, right there. There's just a small portion at the back end. First of all, I wished everything could remain as it did 21 years ago when we bought the farm and Mr. Hudson was alive. Mrs. Hudson and I are neighbors. We have a good relationship. I try to watch out for her property, and I completely and totally understand the situation that she is in. So as far as having change take place, I'm not opposed to a church. By no means. I'm not opposed to the scenario that is coming, but just as Mr. Culp, I am even lower than he is. I am at the lowest point, and for the first 11 years of which we lived at that location, we were flooded every time there was a hard and fast rain. We had up to 14.5 inches of rain up to 3 days in and around our own private moat. I was in this very place talking to the county about a ditch that was never dug when the subdivision was done, and the county did not follow through. That's done. The ditch was dug, and it does go to that retention pond, which Mr. Hudson at the time used as a cattle pond. However, as Mr. Culp said, if that pond area, which will become their pavilion and entertainment area, is hard surfaced to where the ground does not soak it up, we will flood along with 8 other people that will back up to it beyond that off of Cottonwood and Meadowwood. And this, if you don't believe me, come on a hard, fast rain scenario and you're going to see, because the ditch now drinks it as fast as it possibly can. I have other concerns in regards to this, is that, you know, if the role was reversed, I'm sure that Mrs. Hudson would feel the same way. Will this raise my taxes and force me into city? Because I am presently in county. Will my perimeter of my property be changed, even though that they spoke of a buffer? We have been in scenarios up and down Rucker to where there is a buffer, or whatever they call it, a barb, a raised soil area where they plant vegetation on top. Behind Publix, this was supposed to be done. The barb is about 3 foot high, and the 2-foot pine trees that they planted when it was built are still just 3 foot high. So the buffer is basically non-existent. There's not really any privacy. I'm not even opposed to seeing a pavement. However, I am opposed to everybody seeing the comings and goings in my backyard. I would hope and request that there would be plans for a graph for each of us 4 connecting neighbors to be able to know what's coming, that we can have it in our possession so that we can know exactly where the building is be. Because you say that 90 foot, I'm 5'3". 90 foot when that you're talking about a tree or a fence or a pavement for traffic is not that far. And again, the retention pond that collects flow of overflow rain hard and fast could possibly put me in a flood zone. I'm not in a flood zone. I have a VA loan. I am not allowed to have a VA loan in a flood zone. So this is something that is, first of all, my priority of concern, along with the traffic. Those of you who may or may not know about Rucker, it is a 2-lane, very high, with no shoulder, dangerous road, that if you are coming off of 96 West and Franklin Road and you're headed towards Highway 99, people don't obey the 40-mile-an-hour speed zone. They think they can go 65 or more. You cannot turn off onto our street fast enough without getting the horn and other profane gestures and words by people who just, you can't get out of their way fast enough. So I'm very concerned about the traffic flow. I'm concerned about the rainwater runoff. I'm concerned about the privacy. I do welcome a church. I just hope that we can please respect one another enough to make there be a really good compliance there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Tibbs.
I'm the second guy down from the corner. Max Canor, 3422 Birchwood Circle. I'm next door to Mr. Culp. And I'm sorry I took a nap here. I can't hear anybody talking hardly, so my hearing aids don't do too much good, so I missed a lot. But anyway, a couple of questions. We work on that southern border. I understand the church is going to, or the building, the nearest building is going to be 90 feet from our lot line. And boy, am I going to be glad they're going to take that, that that stand of trees that's going crazy and falling over on my property. But anyway, how wide is the buffer going to be? Ballpark. And what type, you may have talked about the design of that, but how wide from my line is the buffer going to be?
The Type C buffer that's proposed is 12 feet wide.
It's what?
12 feet wide.
Oh, okay, 12 feet, whether it's grass or whatever, okay.
I'm sorry?
And then between that 12 foot and the building, what is going there? I couldn't tell you.
I can, if you want to pose all your questions, I can write them down and then answer them all at one time.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, right now, just what's between the end of the buffer, after a 12-foot buffer, and the building? Parking or what?
Okay.
That's basically it. And then traffic, I have to agree, 1,000 we all know the Rucker. Does anybody know when Rucker is going to be widened? No, that's the county's problem, I guess. But that's a terrible, terrible road. But anyway, and the traffic is going, you got two entrances are off the property on the Rucker. On a two-lane road, it's going to be a mess. So that's basically satisfy what I have. Thank you very much.
Let me go ahead and answer his questions. With regards to the distance of the building to the property line, it's the 12-foot buffer, and then parking, which would total about 80 feet, and then there is there'd be a sidewalk and some landscaping in between the parking and the building, so approximately 90 feet.
So you're going to, Mr. Knorr, you're going to have a 12-foot buffer from your property line, go 12 feet. That's going to be trees and bushes, and then you're going to start the parking, and there's going to be about 80 feet across parking, and then you're going to have a little bit of landscaping around the church itself, 5 feet or so, and then the church building.
And Chairman Rogers, I misspoke. I don't know what I was thinking adding. It's about 60 feet or so, 60 to 65 feet of parking. So it's that I thought my math wasn't adding up, as opposed to the 80 feet of asphalt.
And then, Matthew, I know the question was, how high is the buffer?
How high is the buffer? Like at planting?
Yes, sir. Is there any minimum height requirement for the buffer?
I would have to look back in our ordinance. The board could probably put a minimum height on the planting materials as a condition of approval. I would have to look in our ordinance to see if there is a minimum height for plant materials upon planting.
I believe that there's a minimum caliper size for the plant material that's designated as trees, and so and whatever that size is, you're going to get some corresponding height. But reality is, you can't plant a 20-foot tall tree. You've got to plant it with some reasonable size and then let it grow. Now, is there already, Matt? There's already a tree line in there, right?
There's already a tree line. We won't leave that in place and just supplement with evergreen material, which would be at least 6 feet tall at planting, maybe taller. And then, like Mr. Ives said, there's some caliper inches that usually reflect more like, I think, in the 8 to 10 feet range, tall at planting that are deciduous. Whereas the evergreens help make up that year-round screening. But it's what we propose, I think, is consistent with our other churches we've had this issue on.
Right, and we have two separate processes, and in this process we're focused mainly on the use. Now, we do focus somewhat on, we look at the conditions because the BZA has the ability to impose certain conditions on the use. But if we assume that this gets approved today, then sometime within the next few weeks or months, I'm not sure what their schedule is, the applicants will be coming back with a detailed site plan. And that detailed site plan will be studied very hard by a number of city staff from our Planning and Engineering Department, our City Codes Department, Urban Environmental, Fire Department. I think that's probably it. But they will be looking, and one thing, Rutherford County is blessed by being flat. You don't have hills to climb, but it's also cursed by being flat, because when it's flat, you have a problem having things drain. Drainage requires some amount of slope. So we look very hard during the site plan process to make sure that the engineers who are designing the sites do not make a flooding situation worse for their neighbors. Hopefully, they will improve it by channeling the water from this site to go somewhere else, not on in your backyard. So we look very hard at that. Without seeing site plans, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I suspect the applicant quite possibly will be required to do some improvement to construct some turn lanes off of Rucker Lane. And I'll digress a minute. Rucker Lane has been mostly at least designed. I can't tell you when it'll be constructed, but that is going to be a city project. The city is going to construct Rucker Lane from 96 down to where it V's off or Y's off and connects into Veterans Parkway. I think that we'll probably be waiting for the remaining section of Veterans 2, which is from Barfield Road out to St. Andrews, for that to be completed, and that has been bid, and construction will be starting on that very soon. But it's a short term, but I can't tell you it'll start this year, next year, or even the year after. But the plans are there to make Rucker into a continuous 3-lane, so there'll be a continuous center turn lane, and I'm fairly sure it'll have curbs and gutters and some amount of shoulders and sidewalks along with that. So I know it's the traffic out there. I've driven that road. Fortunately, never at rush hour, but I have driven it. I know it's a problem, and it is going to be addressed. We can't do all of them at the same time.
He gets an A for being here.
Good. All right. We'll take it. Mr. Culp, let me make sure nobody else wants to make any comments, and then we'll come back to you, okay? Thank you.
Chairman, board members, my name is Joe Machota. I live at 137 Cottonwood Drive, which backs up to the recreation area. Okay, my big concern is, well, first off, I say I'm glad that the church is buying the property. I'm a little concerned about apartments coming in there, and maybe this will get rid of some of the apartments, but I'm glad that they're coming in. But I am concerned about the flooding, and I make sure that the Planning Commission, and I will be at all the meetings, because there's a drainage ditch that comes from beside my house, okay, and goes back to this where the recreation area is. All of that has flooded, and the duplexes over on the Franklin Road, I've seen water go all the way up into those backyards of those duplexes, backed up all the way up on my property. There's that drainage ditch. It's grown up right now. It's all grown up with trees, and I know they want to leave that, but that also needs to be cleaned up too, so it can drain properly, unless they're going to take the drainage somewhere else. If they're going to take the drainage somewhere else, I mean, there was flooding over in Birchwood till the county finally dug the ditch for them to get that water to that retention pond. If you look at the original plans, there was a 30-year easement. I've been out there over 35 years, and that easement is gone now because nobody renewed it. So, but I'd like to see something done. I mean, you know, they're adding 580 parking spaces. That's all going to be asphalt. And they're taking away from, like they said, the drainage capability. The other question I have, Matthew, is the northern part of that property, is it going to stay R15?
There's no pending zoning request for the northern portion of that property. I can't speak to whether or not someone in the future might come to us with a zoning request. That's an unknown at this time.
Okay. That's all my comments. Main thing is the drainage is what I'm looking at.
Thank you, Mr. Machado. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against the application?
I'm Gary Pratt. I live at 714 Penn Court, which is a long ways from where they're talking about. I will neither speak for or against this application, but I would like to make a comment to you. If you recall, we've had these problems with another church, which is in my backyard, and I would suggest that you consider these 3 phases one at a time, not grant them all at once,
So if something goes wrong with that drainage plan, you will have some way of coming back and getting it corrected before they go ahead and build the rest of the parking lots and such.
Yeah. Mr. Pratt, are you on Cason Lane? You're
Yes.
talking about the church on Cason Lane?
Yes. Okay. And as you know, that is a drainage problem right into my backyard.
I'm sorry. All right. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against the application? Okay, Mr. Culp.
Thank you. Just for a couple of comments, some dimensions and sizes have been bandied around. A 12-foot buffer, that's the distance from your secretary's desk to your desk, Mr. Chairman. 65 to 70 foot is the width of this room. So we're looking at the building being just a little bit further away from our properties than the width of this room. You've mentioned 1 story. Normally in a apartment building, 1 story is about 10 feet. You're talking 29 feet for the 1 story with the spire or any other accessory on top, bringing it up into the 40 plus feet. So think of your dimensions and how close that this property is going to be to us and the potential that it does have for disrupting us with the flooding and also noise, traffic, and lighting. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cole.
There's one other thing I wish to address. At Victory Village, down 96 West of Franklin Road, there has been building continually going on. And as far as the underground blasting to get through the bedrock, to put in the sewer and septic systems and all of that, my windows are constantly rattled. Those of us up and down Birchwood have often felt this when Publix was built, when Victory Village was built, when the subdivision that is down to the left of Franklin Road still being built, seismic-wise, fault line-wise. I have known people up and down both Beasley and Brinkley Road have their foundations cracked from the bottom of their foundation to the top, and the insurance is not covering it because it did not pertain to development by the county or the city. I'm very concerned about that when these 3 phases are being done. And once again, as far as the flooding goes, you say that it is 1 story, as Mr. Culp had brought to your attention. I have a 1-story ranch home built in 1973. It was very obvious to the developer that I was on a low area, so my floor on the 1 story is up to my shoulders. We come up that many steps off of the earth and the ground in front of us before that the 1 story begins. Where that this property is, I fully doubt that there will be a short, if any, crawl space. They will have to elevate this before they start the 1 story, because I seriously doubt that they're going to be able to get a whole lot of digging done with the bedrock that goes underneath there. Like I said, I've lived there 21 years. We have helped Mrs. Hudson maintain the property that backs up to us. We saw Mr. Hudson farm and have his cattle and everything else. We have seen the crops of both grain and soybeans, and there's just only so much you can do with what is underground. So, like I said, I'm not opposing the church, but I also want to bring to your attention that I know that the city and the county of Rutherford, both Murfreesboro, are well aware with Southern Creations, which is a large landscaper, and Greenspan Nurseries and a lot of other nurseries. I have worked for landscaping. Yes, you can put up a 10-foot tree, fully mature, just as easily as you can plant a 2-foot one. You can also make sure that the vegetation is a fast-growing evergreen. not one that to save money is 2 foot that will take 20 years to get to be 5 foot. So please, all I ask is there be a happy blend and that each party involved puts themselves in the opposite shoes so that we can not make each other very unhappy with the fact that there's going to be change. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right. Unless there's anyone else, then we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed, and we'll open the floor for further discussions or motion.
Obviously, a lot of discussion about drainage, and I feel like Matt and his company have tried to address that best they can. Let's step ahead a couple of steps, and the property's been developed, and the neighbors there feel like that the drainage wasn't, that it's gotten worse. What's the process, mediation process, to try to get them back? I guess in developing this, their job, Matt's job, is not to make it any worse. If it has gotten a little worse, what's the process that typically happens there for those residents to give them some recourse?
One good thing is it is in 3 phases, and phase 1 and 2 may happen fairly closely behind each other due to the scale, but phase 3 the church sees as a longer term project unless it's just much more rapid growth, which would be good for them, but we would have to go back to Planning Commission 3 separate times for each one of those phases. When we go to Planning Commission, so assuming that we're, say, 5 years down the road with phase 3, they'd be able to see, hey, you didn't do your job. But with our plan, I think we're going to redirect almost all the water that goes toward the south right now toward the existing pond that is there. So hopefully Mr. Culp and Ms. Tibbs would see a relief and a lessening of the runoff to their property than what they see even today. So we should be helping that situation. We have no intentions of getting rid of that pond. Our plan is to make it bigger, in fact.
And what I would add, Mr. Young, is that if residents do see a negative impact, they would be encouraged to contact our engineering department. They're encouraged to contact us when we get the full site plan submitted for Planning Commission review, and our engineers would be happy to sit down with them and go over with them how the property is proposed to drain. Our engineers on staff will scrutinize the drainage plans to ensure that there is no net negative impact on the surrounding property owners. And certainly, if something occurs out in the field that is different from what Mr. Taylor depicts on the plans and through his calculations that he submits with those plans, then those neighbors would be encouraged to call our engineering department and have them look into the situation.
Okay.
I would say I believe Mr. Culp's, some of his issue with what goes on in his yard would be solved once the roadway gets widened. I think the city has a plan to drain that area. I think right now it's a low area that's just a bowl. With the, I think somebody mentioned the Victory Village project. There's an existing stub street over there. The city's already stubbed large diameter pipe at the end of that road that would get extended over once it gets built to be able to drain this front part of the property to the east of Mr. Culp's property. We did reach out to the county engineering department as well. We saw some potential for some closed depression, some drainage problems over there, and they did inform us of what they had seen and what they had done as far as improvements over there better part of a decade ago, they thought.
Okay.
Having gone through the experience of the church on Cason Lane, I am a little uneasy about approving the project in its entirety. Is there a downside to approving it in phases, approving it phase 1 first?
Well, I mean, obviously the church would like some kind of assurance they were going to be able to build their vision there. We were looking at the Planning Commission as going back there 3 separate times as maybe that control mechanism for the church wants to be good neighbors, so they want a good buffer there. They don't want to disturb their neighbors. They want to be an asset to the community and the neighborhood. the recreational area. They don't intend for that to be just a church use thing. If the community wants to go over there, they're not going to prevent that. They want to be welcoming in the community and not disliked there. So I think they're going to make very good neighbors. And I will say the building height, the 29 is the maximum height. The building does have variation in its roof line down to, I think, about 16.5 feet, which is more in line with what the neighbors' homes are to the peak of the roof, or a little bit less than that probably. That's done to create some architectural interest, make it appealing to the eye rather than just a blank single parapet wall. Some of the same elements that you'll see out in the gateway that you mentioned earlier, Mr. Rogers.
Isn't it true, Matthew, that if the church ever wanted to expand beyond what's included here in the way of its use, like a daycare or child care, they would still be required to come back to BZA for something like that?
That's correct. Right now, they've only identified child care 1 day a week. If they wanted to expand that, that would require an amendment to the special use permit if this is approved. Likewise, if they, another similar accessory use would be like a mission. If they wanted to have some type of mission there, that would require reapplication to the board for an amendment to the special use permit. How they develop the property and how they use the property would need to be consistent with this application today.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Taylor? All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Are we ready for a motion?
So our mechanism, if there are issues, it would be the planning commission stage. It's phase one starts. And there's some portion of it that's not going quite right. The residents there that have voiced concerns, the planning commission would be the place to, hey, something's not going right. The water's not there. The buffer wasn't sufficient of what we approved here. The type C. That's the stopgap.
Well, the buffer that you require, if you require a type C buffer, would be what would be required for the property. There are certain requirements when you talk about our certain buffer types, and our urban environmental department will be responsible for ensuring that the buffer meets those minimum requirements. If there are requirements above and beyond, if you wanted to put a minimum height on the plantings, or if you wanted to increase the buffer type beyond what they are proposing here. For example, there's a type D that is a 15-foot buffer and a type E that's a 20-foot buffer. That would be an option that you would have. I will mention that a type E buffer, which is our most restrictive or our most intense buffer, is what you would see between an industrial zoning district and a single-family residential zoning district. A type D buffer is what you would typically see between a commercial highway zoning district and a single-family residential zoning district. Type C would be what you would see between a multifamily residential zoning district and a single-family residential zoning district, to kind of give you an idea of how those buffers are typically applied when it's based upon adjoining districts. When it goes back to the Planning Commission for site plan approval, technical items such as drainage can be addressed at that time. But bear in mind that with the special use permit, if you approve all three phases, you are authorizing the use of the property. When it goes to Planning Commission, it's more of an exercise in meeting minimum requirements for the landscaping requirements that were imposed by the Board of Zoning Appeals, meeting minimum requirements with regards to parking space size, driveway aisle dimension, functionality of the parking lot, dumpster or solid waste requirements, things of that nature, drainage. So the land use entitlement is what you are reviewing now.
I was looking through some of the pictures I noticed on the landscape plan it mentioned some of the large trees to remain, and I guess supplementing that with something that may not be as tall. Of course, one of the pictures here was a little far away, but it looks like it would be as sufficient a buffer as you could set up initially without being able to lay eyes on it.
In many instances where there are existing trees along a property line, it's preferable that if those trees are healthy and they would add to a buffer, to be able to keep those and supplement them with new plantings, because mature trees are, they're much bigger than the new trees, and if they're healthy, will add to that buffer. And I think that in most instances, that's what we see, is that those existing trees are attempted to be preserved. And I think that's what Mr. Taylor has indicated that they would do, even where he is proposing the Type C buffer, that Type C buffer would supplement any existing vegetation along those property lines.
If we approved, if instead of relying upon just Planning Commission, if we did approve this in phases and just approved Phase 1 today as a special use permit for only Phase 1, would that mean that if they came back for Phase 2, they would be asking for a special use permit to include Phase 2, and at that time we could impose higher restrictions? Should that be necessary under the? If
you were to only approve Phase 1, they would have to come back to the Board of Zoning Appeals for another special use permit for Phase 2. I don't know that you could, say for the portion of the site of the parking lot that is adjacent to Phase 1 that they're including with Phase 1, and you require a Type C buffer with the Phase 1 parking lot. I don't know that you could require them to go back and put in a Type D buffer in that same location. Now, you may require a Type D buffer with the Phase 2 portion of the parking lot, because say they only planned for a Type C buffer in the Phase 1 with the Phase 1 parking lot, which is 12 feet wide, and their parking lot was built right up to that 12-foot buffer. To impose a 15-foot plant or a 15-foot buffer would entail tearing up parking lot, which would be a little bit impractical. But with each phase, certainly you could place appropriate conditions on each phase.
As needed at that time.
Yes.
I guess I'm weighing back and forth the need to really be restrictive as far as Phase 1 and Phase 2 and Phase 3, or if what we're trying to accomplish is a chance for neighbor comments, if that happens could happen already based on the Planning Commission.
Normally, the site plan approval process is not a public hearing process. It's public notice, and the agendas are published. And of course, the person who is aware of that is free to call the staff and call planning commissioners and register a complaint that way. But there would not be a public hearing in this manner, as there would be if, for instance, they were asking to rezone the property to some other use. Then there would be another public hearing on that. In fact, two. There'd be one at Planning Commission, one at City Council. But the site plan review, while in a public meeting with public notice, does not have a public hearing component to it, which, of course, an application here does.
Well, then, given the nature of the relationship between these neighbors, and that it may make sense to go in phases.
Phase 1 and 2 at this time, and I think we'd be okay with deferring 3 until a later time if the board was okay with that.
How quickly is your plan to build Phase 2 after Phase 1?
I think as quick as the need arises and the church sees that could.
Is that 6
Possible.
months after Phase 1's complete, or would it be 3 years? That's a big difference.
I wish I knew the answer to that.
If you wouldn't mind coming.
I'm John Shepard. I'm the pastor, one of the pastors at the church. So thanks for considering our request. I wish I had the omniscience of God to know how quickly we're going to grow. You do realize that, and I'm sure you do, that all 3 of these phases are simply just trying to be good faith neighbors. We're still trusting that God's just going to continue to grow our church. Right now, our church is, between 350. This Sunday, we'll probably have 450 to 500 people there because it's a big day. We meet at Blackman High School. But we don't know. So I wish I could give you that answer. I'd love to be able to build it 6 months after. That would mean things are going awesome. So.
But there's a big difference for neighbors between 6 months and us approving something, Phase 1 and Phase 2,
sure,
and 3 years where they've seen, what possible consequences may be, especially when it comes to draining. There's a big difference between 6 months and 3 years.
Right.
So I apologize if that's a little too pointed, as I know that I should have known what your answer was going to be. But I think that's why we have such hesitancy as well, because we want people to have the opportunity, for you to have the opportunity to tell us your plans as they may change,
right,
as well as for the neighbors to tell us their plans, so that everyone can have the opportunity to be heard, and because that's an important part of why we're here today.
Absolutely. I would just assume then Phase 1 and Phase 2 when you're deliberating and making a decision today. So.
I'm now saying, as I look at the plan here, there's a Phase 1 section of the parking and Phase 2. Is that kind of clear where you're going to be? Okay.
Mm-hmm. That's what we'd hope. I mean,
maybe 2/3 of the property is going to be 2/3 of that lower.
Yeah, and that may be massaged a little bit, give a space or take a space here or there, but.
Okay.
Mr. Taylor,
yes.
If you could just clarify the area denoted as the recreation area. Right now, that's shown in Phase 3. Would that remain in Phase 3, or would that be?
I think that could possibly happen. The pavilion would possibly happen with Phase 1. It's just the church doesn't have a certain time frame for that pavilion. The rest of that out there is really unimproved area. It will be the detention area, and depending on the building pad situation, we may actually pull all the dirt out of there for the entire development during the first phase to build the building pad if it's suitable dirt. So all the stormwater improvements could possibly be done with Phase 1 or Phase 2 combination, something like that.
Hate to keep beating the dead horse, but repeat that last. You think most of the storm work may happen or would need to happen in this first phase?
It wouldn't necessarily need to happen in Phase 1, but I could see that it is, if we're going to be scavenging, for lack of a better term, dirt out of that area, it makes sense if it's good dirt to use it to build the building pad or part of the parking lot. So instead of going back to the well and doing several things over and over, disturbing the same area, especially when they're going to be trying to possibly use that recreational area during what could be possibly Phase 2 and Phase 3, then it make more sense to go ahead and do all that excavation during Phase 1 and move that dirt to, where it's going to be used on site ultimately.
You're referring to removing dirt from where the retention pond is
the
now?
Existing pond is, and making it larger.
Larger pond, deeper
that way we
pond.
Can, what's that?
A deeper pond?
Not necessarily deeper,
wider?
maybe wider. And all that would be driven by the stormwater calculations we would do at Planning Commission stage to basically say we're not going to raise this water surface elevation here because all the water, the neighbor's water comes to us. Our water doesn't leave our site unless it's an extreme event and overtops. We looked at the May 10 flood photo, the water got up into the back of the duplexes at front on Franklin Road. That was what we described as an extreme event, a 1,000-year storm event there. So we don't want to endanger the neighbors, make that situation any worse, and improve it if we can. I think the church is trying to be a good neighbor by showing them what their ultimate intent is here, rather than let's piecemeal this, let's try to plan for all of it up front now.
I can understand that.
It is also important to me to note, and if the board is, or if someone is going to make a motion, possibly also add a condition with regard to sound to make sure that that sound is exclusive to the outdoor area and not a sound system that includes, just to create a condition there rather than leaving that up to the church, so that due to the other church issue that we had earlier this year and how the sound was also an issue at that church for the neighbors, I think it would be important to add that as a condition.
Are there ordinances that are built in that handle that if noise becomes an issue, or is that?
Well, I think if the neighbors can hear that, we're in violation of our conditional use permit, correct? Or special use permit.
The ordinance says that the application for a special use permit for an institutional group assembly use shall indicate any intentions for the use of systems for the external broadcast of speech, music, or other sounds. If such are proposed, the applicant shall indicate the times of day and duration of their proposed use. The BZA shall have the authority to place restrictions upon their use in order to minimize excessive noise from intruding upon neighboring properties, especially those zoned or used for residential purposes. In no event shall the BZA approve the use of such which would be in violation of the city code or ordinances regulating noise. BZA approval does not constitute a waiver of any city code or ordinances regulating noise. If there are, Mr. Taylor has attempted to identify the external speakers in his answer to this particular standard. With regards to any additional noise, including that noise coming from within the sanctuary, or with any music occurring inside the building, and they would be subject to the city's noise ordinances and enforcement by our police department.
Because it would be outside of the standard of their, outside of the conditions that they've limited themselves in their application.
Well, I think that what I'm saying is that any noise, I mean, regardless of if it's on this property or if it's on at my house or at Mr. Taylor's house, any noise that's in violation of the city's noise ordinance will be subject to enforcement by the police department. With regards to any, what that standard attempts to say is that BZA approval does not constitute a waiver of any city code or ordinances regulating noise, that they would be subject to those same noise ordinances.
I guess my question is, if there's no need for us to have an additional condition, because within their application they've stated the limits that they have, and within their application, as I understand what you're saying, is that they did state that that would be a separate sound system that would only be within. Was that within the application, or was that only what Mr. Taylor told us today?
No, that was in his application.
And that would be a separate sound system and not be a sound system that from the main auditorium.
We may not have specified it would not be, but we'll gladly write a letter to clarify that. I honestly just didn't think about it projecting preaching over the intercom or speakers. I didn't think of that as an option, to be honest with you. And as far as some of the assumption or assurances on stormwater and landscaping, the city's inspection process for stormwater anymore is much more stringent on the construction side. In addition to that, before the city will even go look at it, they are putting the onus back on the engineer, myself, or somebody else from my company to go out and look at this and make sure it's constructed per our plan. That way we don't have a situation, I believe some of the residents mentioned earlier, that there was a ditch on the plan that was never installed. That can't happen now because we just simply won't write the letter if that's the case, and the city will not give a certificate of occupancy. That's something new under the new stormwater regulations that was not in place 20 years ago or even 5 years ago necessarily. The city has a dedicated stormwater inspector. He visits the site, I won't say daily, but I'd say weekly during the construction process to monitor those things and make sure he's seeing the construction happen in a fashion he likes. Our buffers are perpetual buffers. They're not like our just perimeter plantings. Perimeter plantings have a 3-year bond and it goes away. But the buffers have perpetual buffers or maintenance requirements that the urban environmental can go out at any time if you're not maintaining that landscape buffer until you've got to improve it, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Baumley.
That's correct. The buffers are required to be maintained perpetually to meet the requirements of, if a type C buffer is what is required, the type C buffer will be required in perpetuity. And as a matter of fact, there's another church right now that was required to have a type C buffer adjacent to a property line, and that buffer has had some failures, and so we are actually working with that church right now on bringing their buffer into compliance. So we do, if there's a failure in the buffer, it's something that once we are made aware of that we will take action to make sure that it is brought into compliance.
All right. Unless there's any other questions, we're ready for a motion.
Well, I feel like we've impressed upon the applicant our concerns and think they're doing their best to address those. I will make a motion to approve the special use permit subject to staff comments. I'll include phase 1 and 2 in this initial approval. Only.
And that is to include the pavilion in the recreation area. Is that the desire of the applicant?
Correct.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
All right, 2 seconds. All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Mr. Taylor, that application has been approved, at least as to phase 1 and phase 2. Thank you. All right. We now consider staff reports and other business. I think Mr. Lewis, there he is.
Chairman Rogers, if I could interject one thing before Mr. Lewis begins. We have a special guest with us, Miss Georgia Machoto. And I've been informed that it is Mr. Joe Machoto's birthday today.
Well, happy birthday. And he's leaving, so we didn't have to hear her sing. It was good to see y'all.
That I'm glad Matthew's back, and we appreciate his work. I know you all do. And I want to make another comment. The Board of Zoning Appeals, it's one of the toughest boards that the city has, and I know a lot of people appreciate what you do, and it's a difficult board to be on and do well, but you all do a real good job. What I have for you today is an update of Public Chapter 862's continuing education credits. We have had fewer teleconferences this year, and there are 3 left for this calendar year to get the required number of hours. Looking through the summary, looks like most of the Board of Zoning Appeals is, they're doing pretty good.
Who's not doing very good?
Oh, wow. In June, you think you're May, you think you're doing okay, and then you look at October and you're not.
And I also handed out a schedule of the 3 remaining teleconferences if you're able to attend those. If you have other meetings that might pertain to the planning process with Board of Zoning Appeals, if you let me know, I'll be happy to include them in the yearly report. If you have any questions about that, you can contact Brenda or myself, and we'll be happy to answer them. And that's all I have.
All right. All right. Any comments to Robert?
Looks like I'll be going to some meetings.
And Mr. Chairman, I would like to say a word of public thanks to Mr. Lewis for pinch hitting for me last month while my son was born, and I really appreciate his hard work.
Yeah, he did a good job. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Appreciate the info and appreciate you filling in last month for us. All right. Well, is there any other business then to come before the board?
We do. We have our consideration of our 2014 calendar.
All right. Got ahead of myself there. All right. So these are the dates for proposed deadlines and proposed meeting dates. All right. I guess we need a motion to approve the calendar then.
Yes.
Is there any discussion about the proposed dates? All right. Do we have a motion to approve the calendar?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. We'll go with that calendar. Now, is there any other business?
There's one item of other business.
All right.
I'd like to introduce you to our newest staff planner, Mr. Joe Ornelas. Joe, if you could stand up. Joe started with us last...
Come on up close.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did he wait through this whole thing?
He did. He did. I invited him to this meeting. Too bad he didn't start last month. He could have been here for a half-hour meeting.
You're right.
This is Joe Ornelas, our newest staff planner. He started last Monday, and we'd like to welcome him on board to the city of Murfreesboro.
All right. Well, thank you. Welcome, Joe. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure.
Go to the podium.
Take the microphone, please.
All right.
That's rule number 1 right there. It was just training 101.
Well, I just came from Clarksville, Tennessee. I got my master's in urban and regional planning from the University of Iowa. And I was in Atlanta for the summer doing an internship. And so I applied for this position here, and Mr. Joseph Adelot hired me. So here I am.
Great. All right. Well, we look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you for your patience sitting through this meeting, too.
It'll be the first of many.
You look very excited about it. All right. Any other business? If not, we're adjourned.